Section 1. Who is Stewie Griffin? The concept and the creation. Picture this for a moment. A small living room, somewhere in Rhode Island, bathed in the soft glow of a television set late at night. A family is going about its chaotic, ordinary, and wonderfully absurd business. A large man on the couch, a patient woman at the piano, a teenage girl sighing about her life, an awkward boy wandering aimlessly through the hallway. And in the middle of it all, sitting in a high chair, eating pureed peas with a silver spoon he holds with practiced, elegant precision, is a 1-year-old infant plotting the complete and total subjugation of the entire human race. That is Stewie Griffin, and there has never been another character quite like him in the history of American television. Before we get into all of it, the schemes, the weapons, the time machines, the friendships, the heartbreaks, the reinventions, and everything that follows across more than 2 decades of storytelling, it is worth taking a moment to understand how Stewie came to exist in the first place. Because his creation was not an accident, and it was not a small thing. It was a very deliberate artistic decision made by a very specific young man with a very particular imagination, and understanding that decision helps explain everything about who Stewie is and why he has lasted as long as he has. Seth MacFarlane was born in Kent, Connecticut, in 1973. He showed an extraordinary talent for drawing and voices at a very young age, and by the time he was attending the Rhode Island School of Design in the early 1990s, he was already developing the sensibilities that would eventually define his career. He was drawn to old Hollywood, to big band music, to the films of Alfred Hitchcock, to the suave sophistication of James Bond, and to the long tradition of British character acting. He was also, perhaps surprisingly, a deep admirer of classical animation, the kind with genuine craft and weight and expression behind every single frame. While still in school and in the years just after, MacFarlane worked as an animator and writer at Hanna-Barbera Studios, contributing to shows like Dexter's Laboratory, Johnny Bravo, and Cow and Chicken. This was not glamorous work, but it was important work, the kind that teaches you how cartoons are actually made, how timing functions in animation, and how the relationship between a character's voice and their movement creates something that feels alive rather than merely drawn. He absorbed all of it, and he brought that absorption with him when he began developing his own animated short films. The first of these was a film called The Life of Larry, made in 1995. It featured a round, affable, not particularly sharp, middle-aged man named Larry and his intellectually gifted dog, Steve. If you have ever seen a clip of this short, the resemblance to what would eventually become Family Guy is immediately obvious. Larry became Peter, Steve became Brian. The basic dynamic of a lovable but dim human anchored by his significantly smarter canine companion was already fully formed. MacFarlane followed the life of Larry with a second short in 1997 called Larry and Steve, which refined the characters and their interaction further. These 2 films caught the attention of the Fox Broadcasting Company, who invited MacFarlane to come in and pitch a full television series based on his work. He was 24 years old when he made that pitch, and he delivered it in a marathon 7-hour session that included fully realized voices for every major character, detailed story ideas, and an articulate vision for the tone and personality of the show he wanted to make. Fox gave him a development deal, and it is at this point in the story where Stewie enters the picture. When MacFarlane began designing the Griffin family around the bones of Larry and Steve, he needed to round out the household in a way that gave the show multiple kinds of energy and comedy. He had his everyman lead in Peter. He had his intellectual voice of reason in Brian. He needed a daughter, a son, a wife. But he also wanted something genuinely original, something that no animated family sitcom had ever done before. Something that would instantly signal to viewers that this show was operating by different rules than anything else they had seen. What he came up with was Stewie. The concept, as MacFarlane has described it in various interviews over the years, drew heavily from classic James Bond villain archetypes and the distinctive speech patterns and delivery style of the great British actor Rex Harrison. Best known for his iconic performance in My Fair Lady, MacFarlane wanted a character who spoke with effortless upper-class sophistication, who had an air of complete superiority and contempt for everything around him, and who harbored genuinely world-threatening ambitions but who happened to be 1 year old, wore diapers, and still needed someone to cut his food into tiny pieces. The humor of the concept is so clean and so self-contained that it almost writes itself. A baby who talks and acts like a supervillain. A diaper-wearing infant with a ray gun collection. a child who has not yet figured out how to use a toilet but has nonetheless constructed a fully functional mind control device. The comedy lives in the gap between what Stewie looks like and what Stewie actually is, and that gap is so enormous, so perfectly calibrated, that it never quite runs dry, at least not for a very long time. McFarlane based Stewie's full name on his own Stuart Gilligan Griffin, pulling Gilligan from a half-joking tribute to the hapless sailor of the old classic television series. The name has that slightly old-fashioned, slightly formal quality that fits perfectly with the character's sensibility. Stewie is not a name that belongs to a baby who smears applesauce on the wall. It is a name that belongs to a gentleman. And that, of course, is part of the joke. Stewie's voice is one of the great vocal performances in animated television history. McFarlane voices 4 of the show's major characters: Peter, Brian, Stewie, and Glenn Quagmire, and each of them is a fully distinct creation, but Stewie is arguably the most technically demanding. The accent is not quite British, not quite American, not quite anything real at all. It has the clipped precision of old BBC period dramas, the slightly theatrical emphasis of stage actors from an earlier era, and occasional notes of something almost mid-Atlantic, that old Hollywood dialect that nobody actually spoke in real life. But that sounds exactly like how certain kinds of supremely cultured people imagine themselves speaking. In the very early development of the character, there was something important established about how Stewie interacts with the world. He can speak. He speaks fluently, eloquently, and at great length. But here is the crucial piece of the puzzle. Almost nobody can understand him. The adults in Stewie's world, with very few exceptions, perceive his elaborate speeches as baby babble. They hear him plotting the downfall of civilization and coo at him and hand him a bottle of milk. The only character in Stewie's life who consistently understands and responds to him is Brian, the family dog. Everyone else moves through Stewie's world completely unaware that the tiny being in the high chair is actively working toward their collective doom. This creates a very particular and very rich comedic dynamic. Stewie can say absolutely anything. He can deliver a 7-minute monologue about the structural weaknesses of democracy as a governing system and his plans to exploit them. And Lois will walk by, pat him on the head, and say something about how he looks hungry. The gap between what Stewie is expressing and how the world receives it is the engine of the comedy, and it means that the audience is always in on the joke in a way that the characters are not. We are Stewie's co-conspirators. We know what nobody else knows, and that feeling of shared secret knowledge is endlessly pleasurable. The physical design of Stewie is equally deliberate and equally memorable. He has what fans and commentators have always described as a football-shaped head longer than it is wide, almost oval in its proportions, with a pointed quality at the top that gives him a slightly alien, slightly otherworldly appearance. He wears a pair of red overalls over a yellow long-sleeved shirt, and he carries himself with a posture that suggests someone who considers himself far too important for the chair they are sitting in. His eyes are large and expressive, capable of conveying contempt, amusement, scheming, and as the series develops genuine vulnerability and warmth, he moves with a deliberateness that is both funny and oddly dignified, as though every step he takes is part of a larger plan he has not bothered to share with you. Family Guy premiered on the 31st of January 1999, immediately following Super Bowl 33 on Fox. It was one of the best possible debuts a new television show could have a captive audience of millions of people already sitting in front of their televisions, most of them not particularly thinking about what came next. The first episode, Death Has a Shadow, introduced all of the Griffins, and from the very first moment Stewie appeared on screen, something clicked. He was immediately different. He was immediately funny. And he was immediately something that people had not seen before, which in the landscape of animated television was not a small thing. The pilot episode pulled in approximately 22 million viewers, though it is fair to note that this was substantially boosted by the Super Bowl lead-in. Still, even accounting for that advantage, the number was significant. People tuned in, and many of them stayed, at least for the season, drawn back by the freshness of the characters and the genuine originality of the show's sensibility. Stewie Griffin was, from those very first broadcasts, the character that people talked about the most. He was the one that showed up on merchandise first, the one whose quotes got repeated at school and at work, the one whose image appeared on t-shirts and posters long before the show had accumulated the kind of cultural weight that makes such things obvious. He was the breakout, almost from day one. And the reason for that is straightforward. Stewie was unlike anything else. He occupied a conceptual space that no other television character had claimed: the brilliant, dangerous, terrifyingly competent evil genius, who just happens to also be an infant, and he occupied it with such confidence, such specificity, and such wit that he seemed immediately inevitable. Of course there should be a character like this. Why had no one thought of it before? The rest of this story follows Stewie Griffin across more than 25 years of storytelling. Through all the changes and evolutions and reinventions and occasional missteps that come with a character surviving for that long, it is a story about what it means to be genuinely original, about what happens when creative ambitions shift, and about the strange and enduring power of a 1-year-old infant with a British accent and a laser gun collection. So, settle in, let your shoulders drop, take a slow, easy breath. This is going to take a while, and that is perfectly fine. Drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is for you. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now is a good moment. It helps more than you know, and it means you won't miss a single thing. Section 2. Season 1. The Evil Genius Arrives. The first season of Family Guy ran from January through May of 1999, consisting of 7 episodes, a short order by modern standards, but enough to establish the characters and the world with clarity and confidence. And in those 7 episodes, Stewie Griffin is presented with a specificity and a consistency that is almost startling when you watch them today, knowing everything that comes later. He is evil. Thoroughly, completely, and hilariously evil. This is not a simplification or a reductive summary of what Season 1 Stewie is about. It is the core truth of the character as he was originally conceived and executed. Everything about Season 1 Stewie radiates the energy of someone who has a plan, who knows the plan is going to work, and who is presently annoyed only by the need to operate in a world populated by beings significantly less intelligent than himself. He wears his contempt for the world around him the way other babies wear onesies, constantly, comfortably, and without any apparent awareness that it might strike others as odd. The very first episode of the series, Death Has a Shadow, gives us a taste of Stewie's personality but does not center him as a protagonist. He is one of several characters moving through a story that is primarily about Peter losing his job and secretly collecting welfare. But even in this introductory role, Stewie makes an impression. He is seen in his high chair, conducting himself with the slightly impatient authority of a very busy man who has been inconvenienced by having to eat lunch. It is the second episode, I Never Met the Dead Man, where Stewie gets his first substantial storyline, and where the template for his early arc gets laid out in full. The episode features Stewie creating a mind control device designed to enslave the world's population, and while this particular scheme does not succeed, they almost never do in these early seasons. The way he approaches it tells you everything about who this character is. He is methodical. He is absolutely confident. He has a specific, step-by-step plan, and he discusses it with the calm authority of a CEO walking through a quarterly projections meeting, not the frantic energy of a cartoon villain who knows deep down that he is going to fail. That confidence is crucial, and it is one of the things that makes the early Stewie so much funnier than he might otherwise be. The comedy of a baby villain works best when the baby in question takes himself completely seriously, and Stewie in Season 1 takes himself with a seriousness that borders on gravitational. He never winks at the camera. He never signals to the audience that he knows this is absurd. He proceeds through his elaborate plans with the bearing of someone who has done this 100 times and expects results. The third episode of Season 1, Chitty Chitty Death Bang, is particularly significant in establishing the mythology of Stewie's character. In this episode, it is Stewie's birthday, the day he turns 1 year old, and a visit from a cult recruiter intersects with Stewie's increasingly desperate efforts to arrange a meeting with a shadowy organization known only as the Man in White, who Stewie believes can help him further his plans for world domination. The episode tells us something important. Stewie has an organized criminal network he considers himself part of. His ambitions are not just expressed at the level of the family home. They are global, and they are connected to real-world structures of power. This gives the evil genius routine genuine weight. Stewie is not just a funny baby who says dark things. He is a baby who has actual contacts in the wider world, who has built relationships with people and organizations outside the Griffin household, who operates with a kind of institutional seriousness that most adult humans never approach. The contrast between his physical reality, small, round, in diapers, completely dependent on others for his basic survival, and his professional reality, sophisticated plotter, weapons designer, would-be global dictator is maintained with perfect consistency throughout the first season. His weapons collection is established early and remains a defining feature of the character throughout the Golden Era. In Season 1, Stewie constructs or deploys a remarkable variety of devices, laser guns that fire with terrifying precision, mind control helmets that he has built largely from household materials, weather-altering machines, growth rays, and a series of explosives and incendiary devices that he keeps in his bedroom behind what appears to be a perfectly normal supply of baby toys. Brian is one of the few characters who seems at all aware that this is happening, and even Brian's awareness is limited. He can understand Stewie, he can converse with him, but he does not fully register the scale of what Stewie is building. He treats Stewie's projects with the mild, slightly bemused detachment of someone watching a neighbor build an elaborate birdhouse, aware that it is happening, occasionally commenting on it, but not particularly concerned about the implications. The relationship between Stewie and Lois in Season 1 is one of the most brilliantly sustained comic devices on the show. Lois Griffin is a warm, patient, somewhat long-suffering woman who has navigated the chaos of life with Peter with a kind of resigned grace. She loves her children genuinely and demonstrates that love, constantly checking in on them, comforting them, feeding them, keeping them safe. And the child she lavishes most of her instinctive maternal care on is the one who, at any given moment, is almost certainly plotting her immediate death. Stewie's obsession with killing Lois, referred to in fan and critical discourse as his matricide obsession, is present in essentially every episode of Season 1. It is not always the centerpiece of the plot, but it is always there, hovering in the background, surfacing in an aside or a muttered comment or a glance of pure murderous intent directed at a woman who is, at that very moment, lovingly buckling a small bib around his neck. The jokes about Stewie's desire to harm Lois work because of that sustained dramatic irony, the gap between what Stewie is thinking and feeling, which the audience shares entirely, and what Lois perceives, which is simply the benign presence of her youngest, sweetest, most manageable child. There are moments in Season 1 where the show leans into the tenderness of this dynamic in unexpected ways. Stewie, for all his murderous intent, is still in some ways an infant. He still sleeps in a crib. He still gets carried. He still has moments where Lois's affection reaches him in ways he is not entirely prepared for, and there are small, brief instances in these early episodes where you see something complicated pass across his face, a flicker of something that might be genuine feeling before the armored contempt reasserts itself. These moments are played very lightly in Season 1, almost imperceptibly, and they will become far more significant as the series progresses. But even here, in these earliest episodes, the show is establishing that Stewie is not simply a machine for dark comedy. He has interiority, he has something underneath. The episode A Hero Sits Next Door, which introduces Joe Swanson as the new neighbor, gives Stewie relatively little to do in terms of plot, but several of his moments in this episode demonstrate the character's versatility even this early. He is capable of sharp social commentary, of biting wit about things entirely unrelated to his world domination schemes, and of a kind of casual cruelty in conversation that operates differently from the grand theatrical villainy of his plans. When he insults someone, he does not do it for dramatic effect. He does it because the observation is accurate, and he sees no reason not to share it. This quality, the offhand cruelty that comes not from malice but from simply being too intelligent and too honest to bother with social niceties, is one of the things that will make Stewie endlessly quotable throughout the show's run. The final episode of Season 1, Death is a Bitch, features a subplot where Stewie interacts with Death himself, who has been rendered mortal after Peter accidentally injures him. Stewie's response to meeting the physical embodiment of death is not fear or wonder, but something more like professional assessment. He evaluates the situation. He considers how it might be useful to his plans. He asks reasonable, practical questions. And then, when the opportunity has passed, he shrugs and moves on. This episode encapsulates something fundamental about the early Stewie. He is unimpressed by things that are supposed to be impressive, and he is concerned by things that are supposed to be inconsequential. His scale of values is entirely his own, and it operates by logic that is internally consistent even when externally absurd. By the end of Season 1, Stewie Griffin has been established as one of the most original characters on American television. He has a clear, stable identity. He has a consistent worldview. He has a specific voice and a specific mode of moving through the world. He is funny in ways that feel earned rather than random, and he is menacing in ways that feel playful rather than actually disturbing. He is, in short, exactly what he was designed to be, a brilliant invention executed with great care. The season pulled in respectable ratings, averaging around 12.8 million households, good enough for Fox to order a second season. And while the show was not yet the cultural phenomenon it would briefly become, it had established enough of a following and enough of a distinct identity to earn its place in the Sunday night lineup. Stewie Griffin was on his way. Section 3, Seasons 2 and 3, The Golden Era of Evil. If Season 1 was the introduction, the careful laying out of a character's fundamental nature, then Seasons 2 and 3 are where that character reaches full maturity, full confidence, and full comedic power. These two seasons, which aired from 1999 through 2002, represent what most fans and critics consider the peak period of Stewie Griffin as a creative entity. He is at his most original here. He is at his most dangerous here. And he is, arguably, at his most purely funny here, in the way that clean, confident, well-executed comedy is funny without apology, without ambiguity about what it is trying to do, and without the creative anxiety that comes from trying to be something different. Season 2 opened with Peter Caviar Eater, an episode focused largely on Lois inheriting her aunt's mansion, but Stewie's subplot in this episode is a lovely illustration of the character at his Season 2 best. He has constructed a new weapon. The specifics change episode to episode, because part of what makes the evil genius routine sustainable is the endless creativity of the devices. And he is in the process of working through a plan with Rupert, his beloved teddy bear, when the upheaval of the family's temporary relocation disrupts his timeline. Rupert deserves a dedicated conversation because the bear is one of the great supporting presences in the Stewie mythology. He is, of course, a stuffed animal. He does not move. He does not speak. He does not respond in any observable way to anything Stewie says to him. And yet Stewie treats him with the gravity and consideration you might extend to a trusted senior advisor, consulting him on strategic matters, sharing confidences with him that he would share with no one else, growing genuinely upset when Rupert does not respond to what Stewie clearly considers a very important question. The Stewie-Rupert relationship in these early seasons is played with a lovely kind of deadpan. It is simultaneously completely absurd, this tiny scheming villain earnestly discussing geopolitical strategy with an unresponsive toy, and completely sincere. Stewie's feelings for Rupert are real within the world of the show. They are not treated as a joke at Stewie's expense. They are treated as a fact of his emotional life, which gives them a quality of genuine sweetness that coexists perfectly with everything else about the character. The evil genius who wants to take over the world sleeps every night with his teddy bear, and neither of these facts undermines the other. It is also in Season 2 that the show gives us what is widely considered one of the greatest episodes of the entire series, Road to Rhode Island. This is the first of what will become a long-running tradition within Family Guy, the Road to episodes, named as an homage to the classic Bob Hope and Bing Crosby comedy films of the 1940s and 1950s. In Road to Rhode Island, Brian agrees to pick up Stewie from his grandparents' place in Palm Springs and bring him home to Rhode Island. Through a series of mishaps and misadventures, they miss their flight and are forced to travel cross-country by increasingly improvised means, eventually hitching a ride with a truck driver and walking part of the way. The episode is notable for several things, but for our purposes, the most important is what it reveals about the dynamic between Brian and Stewie when they are removed from the context of the Griffin house and forced to exist as each other's only real company for an extended period. What emerges is not the relationship between a sophisticated child and an amused adult, though that dynamic is present, but something more genuinely companionate. These two very different beings discover, over the course of a long and inconvenient journey, that they actually enjoy each other's company, that they make each other laugh, that the particular strangeness of each of them is somehow less strange when the other one is around. Road to Rhode Island won Family Guy its first Primetime Emmy Award, and it remains one of the most beloved episodes the show ever produced. The musical number at the center of the episode, a song called Road to Rhode Island, performed by Brian and Stewie as they walk along a highway, is one of those moments in animated television that genuinely earns the word classic. It is funny, it is charming, it reveals character, and it has an energy that is somehow both completely silly and entirely genuine. Season 2 also deepens the Stewie-Lois relationship in ways that add texture to the running matricide joke. 15 Minutes of Shame features Stewie's ongoing plotting against Lois intersecting with a subplot about the family briefly becoming reality television stars. And there are moments in this episode where Lois's obliviousness to Stewie's intentions reaches genuinely dizzying heights of dramatic irony. She hands him a glass of apple juice. He has, at that very moment, been describing a specific and detailed plan for her immediate destruction. She says he is her little man. He says in his most perfectly controlled voice, something that amounts to an expression of her imminent doom. She smiles and walks away. The camera holds on Stewie's expression for just a beat longer than strictly necessary. This is the kind of comedy that requires confidence and restraint to land correctly. You cannot push it too hard. You cannot telegraph the joke. You have to trust the setup, trust the character, and trust the audience to feel the delicious awfulness of the irony without having it underlined for them. The early seasons of Family Guy understood this instinctively, and it shows in almost every scene involving Stewie and Lois. Season 3, which aired from 2001 through 2002, continued the momentum of Season 2 with an expanded sense of Stewie's world and capabilities. The episode Mission Impossible introduces the character of Bertram, Stewie's half-brother, who exists at this point only as a rival sperm cell with whom Stewie engages in a miniaturized battle, and it is one of the more genuinely inventive conceptual swings the show takes with the character. Stewie does not want another sibling, viewing a potential rival for resources and attention as an unacceptable threat to his operational efficiency. The episode is bizarre in the best possible way, a fully committed piece of conceptual comedy that asks the audience to simply accept its own premises and follows those premises wherever they lead. Road to Europe, the 20th episode of Season 3, is the second of the Road to adventures, and it demonstrates how quickly this format had become one of the show's most reliable sources of quality storytelling. In this episode, Stewie has become obsessed with a European children's television program called Mother Maggie. And when Brian offers to take him to the show's studio in England to see a live taping, the trip goes rapidly and hilariously sideways. They end up in Saudi Arabia, then England, then various other locations, always one step behind where they intended to be. What makes this episode so effective, and what makes it an important part of the Stewie mythology, is the way it positions Brian as genuinely protective of Stewie, not just tolerant of him or resigned to his presence, but actually concerned for his well-being and willing to go to considerable lengths to ensure it. Their relationship in this episode has the warmth of genuine affection, even as it is played against the backdrop of Stewie's chronic complaints about Brian's navigational incompetence. The affection and the exasperation coexist perfectly because both are real. Season 3 also gives us Stewie in Love, an episode in which Stewie develops what might be described as his first romantic crush on a girl at his daycare named Janet, who is, he decides, the only being he has encountered who might be intellectually equal to him. The episode ends in disappointment, as such things often do, but what it establishes is significant. Stewie's emotional life extends beyond his plans for world domination and his obsession with Lois. He has desires and vulnerabilities that are recognizably human, even as they are expressed in his distinctly non-human way. He wants connection. He wants to be understood. He wants to find someone who can keep up with him. These are not small things, and the show plants them here as seeds that will grow considerably in the seasons that follow. The overall tone of Seasons 2 and 3 with regard to Stewie is one of confident, playful darkness. He is frightening and funny in equal measure. His plans are genuinely elaborate and occasionally almost plausible within the show's internal logic. His contempt for the world around him has the quality of a real perspective, rather than a cartoon villain's generic malevolence. And his small moments of vulnerability, the attachment to Rupert, the pride taken in a well-executed plan, the occasional loneliness of being the only being in his immediate environment who can understand him, keep him from ever becoming simply a joke rather than a character. These are the seasons that established what Stewie was capable of as a creative entity. They are the seasons that made him one of the most talked-about characters on television. And they are the seasons against which everything that comes later will be measured not always favorably, though sometimes with genuine affection for what the character became. It is also worth noting, in considering these seasons, how much of Stewie's success depends on the craftsmanship of the people making the show during this period. Seth MacFarlane's voice performance is extraordinarily subtle, controlled, and capable of enormous range within its very specific register. But the writing that gives him material to work with is equally important. The early Stewie works because someone sat down and thought carefully about what this character would say, how he would say it, and what the specific quality of his intelligence and contempt and occasional tenderness would look like expressed through dialogue. The jokes are not random. They are built on a specific and consistent characterization, and that consistency is what makes them land. This period, seasons 1 through 3, represents the purest expression of the original vision for Stewie Griffin. He is exactly what he was designed to be, operating at full power in a show that knows exactly what it is and how to use him. The ending of these seasons, brought about not by creative exhaustion but by Fox's scheduling decisions and the show's eventual cancellation, was genuinely unfortunate because the character still had enormous unexplored territory left. But the cancellation, as it turned out, was not the end of the story. It was something closer to an intermission. Section 4. The cancellation, the comeback, and what 3 years changed. The story of Family Guy's cancellation and revival is one of the most remarkable stories in the history of American television, and it is worth understanding in some detail, because what happened during those 3 absent years shaped Stewie Griffin's subsequent development in ways that are still felt decades later. By the end of its 3rd season in May 2002, Family Guy had been pulled off the air, shuffled around the schedule repeatedly, and placed into increasingly difficult time slots against stronger competition. Fox moved it from its original Sunday night position to Thursday nights, where it ran directly against Frasier on NBC at the time, one of the most consistently watched comedies on broadcast television. Then it was moved to Tuesday nights, where it lost to Who Wants to Be a Millionaire on ABC. The show never got a stable home long enough to build the kind of habitual viewership that sustains a network comedy over the long term. The ratings reflected this instability, and Fox made the decision that the show was not worth the investment. Family Guy was canceled. The cast and crew were let go. The writers scattered to other projects. Seth MacFarlane moved on to developing American Dad, his next Fox project. The show that had begun with 22 million viewers watching a Super Bowl lead-in premiere was simply gone. What happened next was something nobody predicted. Cartoon Network's Adult Swim block acquired the rights to air reruns of Family Guy at what was reported to be a very low price, since nobody at the time considered the property particularly valuable, and began broadcasting them in April 2003. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Family Guy became the highest-rated program on Adult Swim almost instantly. It pulled in enormous late-night audiences, regularly outperforming both cable and broadcast competition during its time slot. Adult Swim's overall viewership increased by nearly 240% in the period following Family Guy's arrival on the network. At the same time, Fox released DVD sets of the first 2 seasons of Family Guy, and they sold in numbers that had not been seen for a canceled animated series. Hundreds of thousands of copies moved in a relatively short time, driven by the Adult Swim surge and by word of mouth among a fan base that had discovered, through the reruns, a show they had either missed or not fully appreciated during its original run. This was 2003 and 2004, and these were also the early years of video sharing on the internet. YouTube had not yet launched, but other platforms existed, and clips from Family Guy circulated online with a virality that prefigured what would become standard practice for the next 2 decades. Stewie, specifically, was one of the characters most represented in these early viral clips. His monologues, his schemes, his interactions with Brian, these were exactly the kind of sharply bounded, self-contained comedic moments that translated perfectly to the clip format. By the spring of 2004, Fox had seen enough. The network that had canceled Family Guy reversed its decision and commissioned new episodes, making the show one of the extremely rare cases of a television series being brought back from cancellation by popular demand. A 4th season was ordered. It would air beginning in May 2005. For Stewie Griffin, these 3 years of absence were not simply a hiatus. They were, in a meaningful sense, a turning point, even though they happened before the character appeared in a single new episode. Because what happened during those years was that the perception of what Family Guy could be expanded dramatically. The Adult Swim reruns reached an audience that had been too young to watch the show during its original broadcast. College students who had been in middle school when the show premiered became its most passionate advocates. The show developed a cult following that was younger, more online native, and more engaged than the original broadcast audience. This new audience had particular preferences, and those preferences were reflected in what they shared and what they talked about. They loved the cutaway gags. They loved the random humor, the shock value, the moments of pure absurdity. And they loved Stewie, but they were also perhaps slightly more interested in Stewie's personality and his relationship with Brian than in the pure evil genius routine that had defined the character's early seasons. When the writing staff assembled to work on Season 4, it was a different group of people than had produced Seasons 1 through 3. Some of the original writers had moved on permanently. MacFarlane himself, while returning as creator and voice actor, was also simultaneously running American Dad and was therefore dividing his creative attention in ways he had not done before. The institutional knowledge that had made the early seasons so consistent in their characterization of Stewie was not fully intact. MacFarlane has spoken in interviews about his own feelings regarding the evil genius routine by the time the show was preparing to return. He felt, by his own account, that the character's original arc, the world domination plans, the Lois obsession had been largely explored. He did not feel that more of the same would be creatively interesting. He wanted to take Stewie somewhere new. This is an entirely understandable creative impulse. A character who has been doing one specific thing for 3 seasons of television, even a character as richly conceived as Stewie, will naturally prompt its creator to wonder what else is there. What dimensions have not been explored? What would happen if the character grew or changed or discovered something about themselves that they did not expect? The problem is that somewhere new is a destination that requires very careful navigation, especially when you are departing from something as original and as successful as early Stewie. The evil genius baby was not just a gimmick. It was a genuinely unique creative entity. Moving away from it meant moving away from something irreplaceable, and finding a worthy destination was going to require exactly the kind of sustained, careful, show-defining creative vision that had produced the early seasons in the first place. Whether the revival fully succeeded in that navigation is one of the central questions of Stewie Griffin's story, and the answer, like most honest answers about art and creative evolution, is complicated. What the 3-year gap did, essentially, was end one chapter and begin another. The Stewie of Seasons 1 through 3 was complete, a finished, fully realized thing. The Stewie of Seasons 4 onward was a new version, still recognizably the same character, still voiced by the same extraordinary performer, still possessed of the same essential intelligence and wit, but gradually shedding the specific characteristics that had made him genuinely singular. That process was not instantaneous, and it was not without its own moments of genuine brilliance, but it was underway. And understanding it requires looking closely at what the revival seasons actually did with the character, where they kept faith with the original vision and where they began, slowly, to depart from it. Section 5. Seasons 4 and 5. The softening begins. Family Guy returned on the 1st of May 2005 to a reception that felt almost like a civic event. Fans who had spent 3 years watching reruns on Adult Swim and passing DVD copies among friends finally had new episodes to anticipate, and the premiere drew strong numbers that confirmed Fox's calculation had been correct. There was real demand here. There was real enthusiasm. Season 4 premiered to an audience eager to see what had changed and what had stayed the same. And the answer, in the first few episodes, was that quite a lot had stayed the same, including Stewie, who appeared in early Season 4 installments with much of his original energy intact. He still had his British accent, his elaborate schemes, his weapons, his interactions with Rupert, and his consistent low-level hostility toward Lois. He was still funny in the ways he had always been funny, and there were moments in the early part of Season 4 that felt like genuine continuations of the character rather than departures from him. But there were changes too. And they were small enough at first that they registered more as tonal shifts than substantive alterations, the kind of thing you might not notice if you were watching an episode in isolation, but that became clear when you put early Season 4 Stewie next to late Season 3 Stewie and looked at them side by side. The most noticeable shift was in the frequency and centrality of the evil genius routine. In Seasons 1 through 3, Stewie's world domination schemes were present in essentially every episode, sometimes as the main plot, sometimes as a subplot, sometimes as a background element that surfaced in asides and moments rather than in extended sequences. In Season 4, these schemes began appearing less regularly. Episodes would pass without any reference to the Lois obsession, without any new weapon being constructed, without any plan being hatched. Stewie was still clearly intelligent, still clearly distinctive, but the specific evil genius energy was less constant. What replaced it, initially, was a version of Stewie that was more focused on his social and emotional life within the Griffin household and the wider world of the show. He had storylines about his relationships with other characters. He had episodes that explored his personality in ways that were not organized around his plans for world domination. He was developing, in the language of character writing, into a more complex figure, one with multiple dimensions, rather than the beautifully singular focus of his original conception. The episode The Courtship of Stewie's Father from Season 4 is a useful example of this transitional period. In this episode, Peter discovers that Stewie shares his enjoyment of watching Lois get hurt or humiliated, and the two of them bond over this shared dark amusement in a way that is simultaneously funny and a little uncomfortable. What is notable here is that Stewie's antagonism toward Lois is being channeled through his relationship with Peter rather than expressed as an independent, self-directed campaign. He is reacting to Peter's lead rather than operating with the singular focus of his early seasons. It is a small shift, but a real one. The Season 5 premiere, Stewie Loves Lois, is one of the most talked about Stewie episodes of the mid-era, and for good reason. The premise is beautifully simple. After Lois rescues Stewie from a dog attack that tears apart Rupert, Stewie becomes overwhelmed with gratitude and affection for his mother and shifts, at least temporarily. From his default position of murderous contempt to one of devoted adoration, he follows her everywhere. He wants to be close to her constantly. He tells her he loves her. He is, in short, a normal baby, which is the joke, because Stewie experiencing normal baby emotions is as alien and unsettling to him as world domination would be to anyone else. The episode is genuinely funny and genuinely well-crafted. It plays with the established dynamics of the character in a way that is smart and aware of its own history, and it has something the evil genius routine did not always have: genuine pathos. When Stewie temporarily drops the armor of his villainy and simply loves his mother, there is something touching about it, something that connects to the audience's understanding of who Stewie actually is, underneath all the scheming and contempt. But Stewie Loves Lois also signals something about the direction the character was heading. The episode is essentially about Stewie becoming temporarily normal, and the joke, implicitly, is that his return to his standard self is a relief. But in the seasons that follow, the return to his standard self becomes less and less complete. The softness that appears in Stewie Loves Lois as a temporary and comic aberration begins gradually to become part of his baseline character. This is also the period where the Brian and Stewie dynamic begins to genuinely dominate their characterization in ways that are both a gain and a loss for both characters. Road to Rupert. The Season 5 entry in the Road to tradition takes place when Brian accidentally sells Stewie's beloved teddy bear at a garage sale. A genuinely devastating moment for Stewie that is played with appropriate emotional weight, and the two of them travel from Rhode Island to Aspen, Colorado, to retrieve him. The episode is funny and warm, and contains some genuinely lovely moments of friendship between the two characters. But it also marks a shift in what kind of stories the show wants to tell with Stewie. He is increasingly the partner, the companion, the friend, rather than the independent operator conducting his own solitary campaign against the world. Season 5 also features Barely Legal, an episode centered on Meg's crush on Brian after he takes her to prom, which gives Stewie relatively little to do in terms of plot, but contains several excellent moments of commentary from him on the family's general dysfunction. These asides and observations, Stewie as the most perceptive and most honest voice, commenting on the behavior of the people around him, are a function of his intelligence that the show has always used to good effect, and they continue to work well even as other aspects of his characterization evolve. What Seasons 4 and 5 give us overall is a Stewie in transition recognizable as the character who had made such an impression in the original run, still brilliantly voiced and written in his best moments, but beginning to move away from the pure, specific originality of the early seasons towards something that, while not without its own merits, could not make the same claim to genuine singularity. There were other smart, witty, emotionally complex animated characters. There was only one evil genius baby who wanted world domination. The audience, for the most part, did not register this shift as a problem during these seasons, because the show was still very good. The ratings were strong, the cultural conversation around Family Guy was enthusiastic, and the Brian-Stewie dynamic, whatever it cost in terms of Stewie's original character, was genuinely entertaining in its own right. But the creative decision to move Stewie in this direction was made during these seasons, and its consequences would become more apparent with every season that followed. Section 6. Seasons 6 and 7. Stewie kills Lois, the final curtain. Season 6 of Family Guy premiered in September 2007, and for Stewie's story, it contains what is widely regarded as the most ambitious and most emotionally resonant storyline the character was ever given in the original series. A two-part event that served, in retrospect, as both the greatest expression of what the original Stewie could be and the unofficial farewell to that version of the character. The episodes in question are Stewie Kills Lois and Lois Kills Stewie, which aired on November 4th and 11th of 2007 respectively. Together, they represent the most committed and most dramatically sophisticated thing the show ever attempted with Stewie Griffin, and they remain, more than 15 years later, among the most discussed and most beloved episodes in the series' history. The setup is deceptively simple. Lois and Peter go on a cruise. Stewie, annoyed that his plans keep getting disrupted by the demands of family life, finally decides to actually follow through on the thing he has been plotting since the first episode. He shoots Lois and pushes her overboard. And then the show commits to something genuinely unusual for an animated sitcom. It takes the aftermath seriously. A year passes. Lois is presumed dead. The family grieves. Stewie goes about his business, now with the obstacle of his mother removed, and begins actually pursuing his long-delayed plans for world domination in earnest. He takes over the CIA. He moves toward global control. The world starts to change under his influence. And then Lois comes back having survived the shooting, having been rescued by a merman, having suffered amnesia and wandered the country, and having eventually recovered her memory and returned to confront the son who tried to kill her. What follows in Lois Kills Stewie is a genuine action drama thriller played out within the world of Family Guy. Lois confronts Stewie with the truth. Stewie escalates his world domination campaign. There are genuine stakes, genuine tension, and genuine dramatic reversals. And then, at the end, Lois kills Stewie. Peter shoots him first, in a moment of confused action, and Lois delivers the final moment. It is, within the world of the episode, a real death. The family mourns, and then the camera pulls back and we see Stewie sitting in a strange chair-like device, and a message reads, "Simulation over." It was all a computer simulation. Stewie had built a program to model what would happen if he actually went through with killing Lois, and the entire two-part episode was that simulation playing out. None of it happened. Brian walks in with postcards from Peter and Lois enjoying a pleasant cruise. Everything resets. The twist is clever on its surface, and in the moment of its reveal, it works. But what it also does, what it could not help doing, is confirm something about where the show was headed creatively. The evil genius routine, the matricide obsession, the world domination plans, all of it is placed inside a simulation. The show is essentially telling the audience that this version of Stewie, the one they fell in love with, the one who actually might kill Lois someday, the one whose plans are real and whose ambitions are genuine, is now something that only exists in a hypothetical. In the actual world of the show going forward, Stewie is no longer going to seriously pursue these things. The writers knew this. MacFarlane has said in interviews that these two episodes were designed partly as a farewell to the original Stewie concept, a way of giving audiences the payoff they had been building toward since the pilot, of showing them what it would look like if Stewie actually did what he always said he was going to do, and then wrapping it up in a way that preserved the status quo while acknowledging what had been extraordinary about the original concept. It is a generous reading of what might also be described as a bittersweet creative retreat. After Stewie kills Lois and Lois kills Stewie, the world domination plots essentially disappear from the show. Occasional references occur. Stewie still has his weapons and his time machine. But the sustained campaign against Lois, the organized criminal network, the elaborate season-long schemes, these things are gone. Season 7, which ran from 2008 to 2009, shows the consequences of this shift in full. Stewie in Season 7 is a genuinely different character from Stewie in Season 1, and the gap between them is no longer simply the distance traveled by natural character development. It is the distance between one conception of a character and another, substantially different one. The season contains some excellent Stewie material. Road to Germany is the third, Road to, episode and one of the strongest. Sending Brian and Stewie back to 1939 Poland to rescue Mort Goldman, who has accidentally stumbled into Stewie's time machine and landed in Warsaw on the first day of the German invasion. The episode is genuinely dark, genuinely tense in places, and contains some of the best Brian-Stewie chemistry of the post-revival era. Their dynamic in Road to Germany has real weight, the kind that comes from two characters who know each other well and operate with a shared shorthand that the audience has come to understand and appreciate. But even Road to Germany, for all its virtues, is fundamentally about the Brian-Stewie friendship rather than about Stewie as an independent entity with his own agenda. The evil genius is now, primarily, a companion. His intelligence is deployed in the service of other people's problems. Mort needs to get home, Brian needs to navigate, someone needs to steal uranium from a British airbase to fuel the return trip rather than in the service of his own plans. This is not a criticism of the episodes themselves, many of which are very good, but it is an honest accounting of what changed and when. By the end of Season 7, the transition is complete. The Stewie who began the series has been retired, and the new Stewie, smarter than everyone around him, capable of great warmth and real friendship, still funny and still brilliantly voiced, but fundamentally oriented toward relationships rather than conquest, has taken his place. Section 7. Seasons 8 through 12. Identity, Friendship, and the New Stewie. Seasons 8 through 12 of Family Guy, which aired from 2009 through 2014, represent the period in which the transition of Stewie Griffin's character reached its full articulation. The evil genius is gone, not entirely, never entirely, because the show keeps faith with the character's history in ways both meaningful and cosmetic, but gone enough that new viewers encountering Stewie for the first time during these seasons would have a very different understanding of who he is than viewers who came in with Season 1. What they would find instead is a character of extraordinary complexity and genuine emotional depth. The Stewie of Seasons 8 through 12 is not a simple softening of the original character. He is something genuinely different and genuinely interesting in his own right. A figure whose intelligence has found new expressions, whose relationships carry real emotional stakes, and whose identity is presented as an ongoing and unresolved question rather than a fixed and settled fact. The question of Stewie's sexuality, which began appearing as a minor running element in Seasons 4 and 5, becomes a much more prominent part of his characterization during this period. From Season 8 onward, the show explores Stewie's gender expression and sexual identity with what can fairly be described as both genuine engagement and somewhat chaotic execution. He cross-dresses regularly and with evident pleasure. He makes frequent references to his attraction to men. He has storylines involving romantic and quasi-romantic relationships with other male characters. He engages with questions of who he is and what he wants in ways that go well beyond the original character's complete indifference to such matters. The treatment of these themes in the show is uneven. At its best, it gives Stewie a kind of personal interiority and emotional complexity that the evil genius routine did not easily accommodate. At its weakest, it reduces what could be thoughtful character work to a series of jokes that the show does not seem entirely sure how to handle with the consistency they require. But even at its weakest, it represents a real investment in the question of who Stewie Griffin is, not just what he does or what he plans, but what he feels and what he wants, and what kind of being he is at the deepest level. Season 8's premiere, Road to the Multiverse, is one of the great Stewie episodes of the later era and one of the finest entries in the Road to tradition. In this episode, Stewie has constructed a device that allows him and Brian to travel between parallel universes, each of which presents an alternate version of their world. They visit a universe governed by religion rather than science, where all technology has been abandoned and life is significantly more medieval. They visit a universe where time moves at a different pace. They visit a universe where dogs evolved as the dominant species and humans are kept as pets, and Brian, understandably, does not want to leave. Road to the Multiverse won an Emmy for individual achievement in animation for its storyboarding, and watching it, you understand why. The conceptual ambition of the premise allows the show to explore visual styles and narrative ideas that are genuinely novel, and the Brian-Stewie dynamic anchors all of it with the kind of easy chemistry that makes their best episodes feel effortless. Stewie in this episode is at his inventive, confident, intellectually superior best, the evil genius reframed as an explorer rather than a conqueror, but retaining all the qualities that made the original character compelling. Season 8 also contains Brian and Stewie, the episode that many consider the finest piece of character work the show produced in its entire run. The premise is extraordinarily simple. Brian and Stewie get accidentally locked in a bank vault on a Friday afternoon and cannot get out until Monday. They have no food, no outside contact, and nothing to occupy them except each other. What follows is not a standard Family Guy episode in any sense. There are no cutaway gags, there are no B-plots, there is no random humor deployed to pad the runtime. There are simply two characters, in a room, having honest and sometimes painful conversations about who they are. Brian reveals, in this episode, that he keeps a gun in a safety deposit box at the bank. He explains, with a directness that is startling, that the gun is there for a specific purpose, that there are moments when he thinks about ending his life, and that having the gun accessible is something he has chosen as a kind of option of last resort. He does not describe this with self-pity or dramatic emphasis. He describes it the way you might describe a practical arrangement, with the matter-of-fact quality of someone who has thought about a difficult subject honestly and arrived at a position they are not proud of but cannot. Pretend does not exist. Stewie's response to this revelation is one of the best moments in the entire series. He does not try to fix it. He does not launch into an inspirational speech. He does not offer easy reassurances. He simply sits with Brian in the weight of what has been shared, and then he says, with a very controlled but completely genuine care, that he would not want Brian not to be there, that he would miss him. That Brian matters to him in a way that he cannot fully articulate, but that is entirely real. For viewers who knew Stewie from the early seasons, this moment has a particular poignancy. The character who spent his first years plotting murder and world domination, who treated the entire human species as an obstacle to be overcome, is now revealing, in the quietest possible way, that there is one member of that species, one member of the world, whose continued existence matters to him enormously. The evil genius became something more, and in this episode, at least, that something more is worth everything the original concept cost. Season 9 contains another significant Stewie episode, Brian Writes a Bestseller, which is primarily about Brian's arc but affects Stewie substantially. In this episode, after Stewie encourages Brian to write a self-help book and Brian's book becomes a massive commercial success, Brian treats Stewie with contempt and indifference in his moment of triumph, repaying the encouragement that made his success possible with arrogance and dismissal. The episode is critical of Brian in ways that are pointed and fair, and Stewie's response to being treated this way hurt, genuinely hurt, in a way that is both funny and sad, tells you something important about how far his character has come. He is no longer simply the superior being looking down at the beings around him. He is a figure who can be wounded by the people he cares about, which means he cares about them, which means his relationships are real. Season 10's Stewie Goes for a Drive gives Stewie something unusual and genuinely delightful, an adventure in the physical world outside the Griffin household, operating entirely on his own terms. The episode features Stewie taking Peter's car for a joyride and navigating various situations that arise from this decision, and it has the quality of a small, perfect Stewie story, one in which his intelligence and his confidence and his completely unwarranted certainty about his own competence all interact with the real world in ways that are both funny and oddly triumphant. The period between seasons 8 and 12 also sees the Road to series continue with some of its most ambitious entries. Road to the North Pole, from Season 9, is a darkly comic Christmas special in which Brian and Stewie travel to the actual North Pole to meet Santa Claus and discover that the reality of Christmas gift delivery is considerably more disturbing and logistically nightmarish than the legend suggests. Roads to Vegas, from Season 11, splits Brian and Stewie into two pairs of themselves through a teleporter accident, sending each pair through a different version of the same Las Vegas trip, one pair's trip going catastrophically wrong while the other pair's goes spectacularly well. The episode uses this structural conceit to explore questions of luck and choice with more genuine philosophical content than a typical Family Guy episode bothers to achieve. By the end of Season 12, Stewie Griffin has been remade into something genuinely different from his starting point. He is warmer, more vulnerable, more openly emotional, and more capable of the kind of sustained, complex human connection that the evil genius of Season 1 would have dismissed as a weakness. Whether this constitutes growth or loss, or both simultaneously, is a question that does not have a clean answer. But the character is, by any honest measure, still alive, still interesting, still capable of moments that justify the investment of watching. Section 8. The death of Brian Stewie's most emotional chapter. On the 24th of November 2013, Family Guy aired the 6th episode of its 12th season, Life of Brian. It is one of the most memorable episodes the show ever produced, not because of its quality opinions on that vary considerably, but because of what it did and the reaction it generated. The episode begins, as many of the best Stewie-centered episodes do, with a time travel adventure. Stewie and Brian are dealing with the aftermath of a previous trip they had given guns to Native Americans on an earlier visit to colonial Jamestown, and now the historical timeline is substantially altered. They work to fix it, and while they are working on it, Stewie destroys his time machine, deliberately, in a moment that is played as a decision of unusual maturity, a recognition that the capacity to alter time is dangerous, and that some things are better left unfixed. A short time later, Brian is hit by a car while retrieving hockey nets from the street with Stewie. The injuries are severe, and within minutes Brian Griffin is dead. Stewie, who has just destroyed the only device that could allow him to travel back in time and prevent this, is helpless. He stands there. He cannot fix it. The machine is gone. Brian is gone. And the show, to its considerable credit, does not treat this as a quick gag or a moment of easy comedy. The grief is played straight. The funeral is played straight. The family's mourning is played straight. The Stewie-centric portion of this storyline is particularly affecting. He is the one who was with Brian when it happened. He is the one who destroyed the machine that could have saved him, not knowing that he would need it. And he is the one who, in the episodes that follow, has to live with both the loss and the knowledge that he cannot undo it. A replacement dog named Vinny, voiced by Tony Sirico, best known as Paulie Walnuts from The Sopranos, is introduced to fill the void in the Griffin household. Vinny is a character written with affection and played with considerable warmth by Sirico, and he is not without his charms. But he is not Brian. He could not be Brian. And the show knows this. The episodes featuring Vinny have a specific melancholy to them. Even in their comedic moments, the quality of something that is trying to fill a space it cannot quite reach. The public reaction to Brian's death was extraordinary in its scale and its emotional intensity. Petitions with over 125,000 signatures circulated online demanding Brian's return. Social media exploded. The story made national news. People who had not thought about Family Guy in years suddenly had strong feelings about the death of a talking animated dog. The intensity of the reaction took even the show's producers by surprise. And it said something genuinely moving about the relationship between the audience and these characters that, after 14 years, people cared enough about Brian Griffin to grieve him publicly. 3 weeks later, the 8th episode of Season 12, Christmas Guy, resolved the situation. Stewie, still deep in his grief over Brian's loss, is at a mall with Vinny when he spots a younger version of himself at a Santa's workshop booth. A past version of Stewie who still has his time travel return pad. This past Stewie has not yet destroyed the machine. He still has the device. What follows is one of the most emotionally charged scenes in the show's history. Stewie steals the return pad from his past self. He travels back to the moment just before Brian was hit by the car. And he saves him. The reunion between Stewie and Brian, who from his perspective has just had a perfectly ordinary day interrupted by Stewie grabbing him and pulling him out of the road, and Stewie, for whom the events of the past several weeks have been devastating, is handled with great care. Stewie does not explain everything. He cannot. He just holds on to Brian with a ferocity that communicates everything he cannot say, the grief, the guilt, the relief, the love. Brian, confused but sensing that something significant has happened, holds on too. It is, whatever you think of the broader decisions involved in this storyline, a genuinely moving moment. And it confirms something essential about the version of Stewie that has emerged from the evolution of the character since the early seasons. He is capable of this. He is capable of grief, of desperate love, of action motivated entirely by the depth of his feeling for another being. The evil genius who wanted world domination became somehow a character whose most defining moment is saving his best friend. The decision to bring Brian back was widely criticized as a ratings stunt, a manufactured emotional crisis designed to generate attention and viewership, resolved as quickly as possible once its commercial purpose had been served. That criticism is not without merit. The return came too quickly. The reset was too complete. If Brian's death was ever going to be a genuine creative moment rather than a promotional exercise, it would have required a longer period of consequence and exploration than the show allowed. But within Stewie's story specifically, the arc has genuine emotional coherence. It is the story of how much Brian means to him, not stated, not explained, but shown through action. Stewie saves Brian. That is the entire argument. It does not need to be made more complicated than it is. Section 9. Seasons 13 through 18. Finding New Ground. The post-Brian's death seasons of Family Guy are a period in which Stewie Griffin's character continues to evolve in ways that are sometimes surprising and sometimes frustrating, often in the same episode. The evil genius elements are largely absent now, appearing only in occasional flashes that feel more like nostalgic callbacks than genuine expressions of who the character currently is. But what has replaced them is not empty space. There is a version of Stewie in these seasons who has his own distinct identity different from the original, but not without genuine value. Season 13's The Simpsons Guy, a crossover episode with The Simpsons, gives Stewie one of his most delightful late-era plotlines. The episode pairs Stewie with Bart Simpson for a suburban adventure, and while the comparison inevitably raises questions about what each character represents, there is something genuinely fun about watching Stewie encounter someone who is, in his own way, also a particular kind of kid. Bart is a rebel. Stewie is a genius. They are different species of extraordinary, and the episode captures that difference with affection. In Season 14, Road to India takes Brian and Stewie to South Asia in pursuit of a long-distance relationship Brian has become obsessed with, and the episode represents one of the better, latter-era Road to installments, not as emotionally resonant as Road to Germany, or as conceptually ambitious as Road to the Multiverse, but warm, funny, and possessed of the easy chemistry between its two leads that has been one of the show's most reliable pleasures for years. The same season contains Peter's Sister, which is primarily about Peter's arc but gives Stewie several strong moments, particularly in scenes where he observes and comments on the dynamic between Peter and his abusive sister with the clinical precision of someone who has spent his entire life studying this family from the inside and arrived at a comprehensive and largely damning assessment. Season 15's Stewie Isn't Science is a deliberately provocative episode premise. Stewie, through a scientific experiment, manages to make himself pregnant with Brian's genetic material and carries several offspring to term before the situation is resolved. The episode is strange and uncomfortable in ways that are clearly intentional, and it represents the kind of boundary-pushing conceptual experimentation that the show has always engaged in. Whether it works depends heavily on your tolerance for the specific kind of weirdness the show is offering, but it does demonstrate that the writers are still willing to do genuinely unusual things with Stewie, even in these later seasons. Season 16 gives us Send in Stewie, Please, the 301st episode of Family Guy, and one that deserves extended discussion, because it is, by any reasonable measure, one of the finest pieces of character writing the show produced in its second decade of existence. The episode aired on the 18th of March 2018 and was given a longer than usual runtime, with significantly reduced commercial interruption, an unusual presentation that signaled to viewers that the show considered this episode special. The premise is magnificently simple. Stewie has gotten into a fight at his preschool and has been sent to speak with the school psychologist, Dr. Cecil Pritchfield, voiced by Ian McKellen. The episode takes place almost entirely within the psychologist's office. There are no cutaway gags. There is no B-plot. There is no Peter, no Lois, no Meg, no Chris. There is only Stewie and Dr. Pritchfield in a room, talking. What Stewie says in that room over the course of 25 minutes is one of the most revealing character documents the show ever produced. He begins, as he always does, with his armor fully engaged, performing the role of sophisticated, contemptuous, intellectually superior entity for this new audience. He makes observations about the psychologist. He is clever and cruel in the casual, offhand way that has always characterized his social interactions. He is, superficially, completely in control. And then, layer by layer, the armor comes off. He reveals that his British accent is not real. In a moment that shocked viewers who had spent 17 years taking that accent completely for granted, Stewie drops it and speaks in an American voice. A Boston accent, actually, thick and a little rough in the way of someone who grew up in New England and never bothered to smooth the edges. The revelation is played as a genuine surprise within the episode, and then the show complicates it immediately by having Stewie cycle through various other voices from McFarlane's stable of characters, suggesting that the whole thing might have been a gag. But the seed is planted. The British accent, the most immediately recognizable thing about Stewie Griffin, is possibly a performance, possibly armor, possibly the same kind of manufactured persona that Stewie puts on every day for a world he does not quite trust. He reveals in the episode that he is afraid, that behind the schemes and the weapons and the intellectual superiority, there is a small being who is afraid of being ordinary, afraid of being unknown, afraid of spending his entire existence in a world that cannot see him for what he actually is. He talks about Brian with a vulnerability that is devastating in its honesty, describing how much Brian means to him, how the friendship is the realest thing in his life, how the thought of being without it is genuinely frightening. The episode ends with Stewie walking out of the session essentially unchanged in behavior. He goes right back to being exactly who he was before, but with the audience carrying the knowledge of what was said in that room. The armor goes back on, the accent returns. The contempt reasserts itself, but the audience now knows something they did not know before, and that knowledge changes how every subsequent Stewie scene reads. Send in Stewie, please, is the kind of episode that reminds you why these characters matter, why the investment of so many hours over so many years is worth making. It does not require the evil genius routine. It does not require world domination or laser guns or elaborate schemes. It requires only a character who has been built with sufficient depth that there is genuinely something to find when you start looking beneath the surface. Seasons 17 and 18 continue in similar territory, Stewie operating as a central and beloved part of the ensemble, bringing his specific combination of intelligence and emotional complexity to whatever situation the show places him in. The Road to. Tradition continues, with Road to India, and subsequent entries demonstrating that there is still genuine creative life in the Brian Stewie adventure format, even this late in the show's run. Section 10. Seasons 19 through 23, The Modern Stewie. By the time Family Guy reaches its 19th and 20th seasons, something interesting has happened to the critical conversation around Stewie Griffin. The debates that were most passionate in the show's middle era about whether the evil genius had been abandoned too soon, about whether the character's evolution represented genuine growth or creative failure, have largely settled into a more nuanced and accepting position. People still notice what was lost, but they have also, over the years, become genuinely attached to what replaced it. Season 19 includes a number of Stewie episodes that demonstrate the character's evolution with clarity and confidence. The show's writers by this point know exactly who this version of Stewie is and how to use him effectively. He is the cleverest person in any room he occupies. He is emotionally complex in ways that are not always flattering to him, capable of genuine love but also of pettiness, of cruelty, of the particular selfishness of someone who is used to being the most important person in their own story. He still has his weapons and his time machine. He still refers to Peter as the fat man and treats most social interactions with the polite contempt of someone who has agreed to tolerate the company of beings significantly below their level. But he is also, undeniably, a character who has been shaped by his relationships. The friendship with Brian is the defining relationship of his existence, and the show has built that friendship with enough care and consistency that it reads as genuinely real. The kind of friendship that sustains both parties through things they could not survive alone. Season 20 includes an episode called Stewie's First Word, which takes place in the show's present timeline rather than as a flashback or a meta-exploration of the character's history. The premise that Stewie finally says his first recognizable word in the presence of the family produces the perfect payoff. The word is a profanity, delivered with full Stewie precision and evident satisfaction. It is a small episode in some ways, but it captures something essential about who this character is. Even his most ordinary baby milestones arrive wrapped in his specific, unrepeatable personality. Season 22 saw a gradual pullback in some of the show's more extreme treatment of its characters, including a deliberate effort to give the Griffin family more genuine warmth and mutual care than had been present in the darker middle seasons. For Stewie, this meant storylines that explored his relationships with Lois, with Peter, with his siblings with more nuance and more tenderness than the show had typically managed in seasons 8 through 14. The reduced abuse of Meg Griffin during this period had an indirect effect on Stewie's characterization as well. The family dynamics became somewhat healthier, and Stewie's place within those dynamics shifted slightly from peripheral observer commentator to something more integrated. He began having genuine interactions with Lois that recalled, in small ways, the complicated warmth of the Stewie loves Lois era. He began appearing in family storylines where his role was not simply to provide commentary from the sidelines, but to be an actual participant in the family's collective experience. Season 23 averaged approximately 723,000 viewers during its original broadcast, a number that would have seemed impossible to contemplate from the perspective of the show's peak years, but that exists alongside streaming numbers that tell a different story. The show's performance on Hulu and other platforms is considerably stronger, and when measured in total multi-platform viewership, including the hundreds of thousands of hours of reruns that air constantly on Adult Swim, Comedy Central, FXX, and other cable networks, Family Guy remains a significant cultural presence. Stewie Griffin, in these most recent seasons, is a character who has lived long enough to become something complicated and layered in ways that were not possible when he was simply the evil genius baby. He carries his history with him. Every version of Stewie that ever existed, the original villain of Season 1, the transitional figure of Seasons 4 and 5, the emotionally complex companion of the middle era, the therapy room confessor of Send in Stewie, is somehow present in the character who appears on screen today. He is a palimpsest, a character written over and over on the same page, each version partially visible through the ones that came after. Whether this is what Seth MacFarlane originally intended is doubtful. Whether it is better or worse than the original conception is a question with no clean answer. But it is real, and it is interesting, and it has produced a character who has lasted, in various forms, for more than a quarter century, which is itself a remarkable thing. Section 11. Rupert, the road to episodes, and the essential myths of Stewie's world. There are certain elements of Stewie Griffin's story that do not fit neatly into the season-by-season narrative, but that are essential to understanding who he is and why he has endured. His relationship with Rupert, the road to episodes as a complete body of work, the specific mythology of his time machine and what it represents. These are the building blocks of a character whose story is not just about plot developments but about the accumulation of moments and symbols that give him meaning. Rupert, whose full name, as established in the show's extended mythology, is Rupert Suarez Griffin, is the stuffed teddy bear that Stewie has carried since the earliest episodes of the series. He is brown in his first appearances, shifting to a slightly more orange tone in later seasons. He does not move, he does not speak, he has no observable responses to anything, and yet he is one of the most important characters in Stewie's life. The function Rupert serves is to give Stewie a space in which he can be entirely honest. With the family, Stewie performs the contemptuous infant, the scheming genius, the impenetrable sophisticate. With Brian, he is more genuine, but even with Brian there is a kind of maintained dignity, a sense that Stewie is always aware of how he appears. With Rupert, there is no performance. Stewie tells Rupert everything. The schemes, the fears, the plans, the frustrations, the occasional moments of genuine happiness. Rupert is the one audience for whom Stewie has never needed to perform. This gives the bear a peculiar kind of power within the show's storytelling. Moments involving Rupert tend to be among the most emotionally resonant in any given episode, not because the bear does anything, but because what Stewie shares with Rupert is invariably true in a way that his public pronouncements often are not. When something happens to Rupert, when Brian accidentally sells him at a garage sale in Road to Rupert, when a dog tears him apart in Stewie Loves Lois, when Brian destroys him in a later season in one of that character's less sympathetic moments, the audience understands immediately that something is being threatened at the deepest level of Stewie's existence. Rupert is not a prop. He is a relationship. He is the safest relationship in Stewie's world, precisely because it asks nothing of him. The road to episodes, taken as a complete body of work rather than individual installments, constitute something remarkable. In animated television, a sustained anthology format that has been maintained across more than 2 decades and more than a dozen entries, each one paying homage to the Bob Hope and Bing Crosby tradition, while finding genuinely new conceptual territory to explore. Road to Rhode Island, Season 2. Road to Europe, Season 3. Road to Rupert, Season 5. Road to Germany, Season 7. Road to the Multiverse, Season 8. Road to the North Pole, Season 9. Roads to Vegas, Season 11, Road to India, Season 14. The list keeps growing, and each entry adds something to the cumulative portrait of Brian and Stewie's friendship. What makes the Road to tradition so durable is that it solves a problem the show frequently encounters with Stewie in his later iterations. The problem of finding things for him to do that are genuinely interesting without requiring the evil genius routine. The Road to format removes both characters from their usual context and places them in situations where they must rely entirely on each other. Without the family, without the familiar settings, without the usual supporting cast, it is just Brian and Stewie, navigating whatever strange world they have ended up in. And it turns out that this is enough. These two characters, with their specific dynamic and their specific kind of chemistry, are enough. The time machine is another essential element of the Stewie mythology, one that has served the show in multiple capacities across its long run. In the early seasons, the time machine was another weapon in Stewie's arsenal, one of his more impressive technological achievements, deployable in service of his various plans. In the post-revival seasons, it became the primary mechanism for the most ambitious Brian-Stewie adventures, a plot device with essentially infinite narrative potential. And in Life of Brian, it became the pivot point of the most emotionally charged storyline in Stewie's history. First, its destruction enabling Brian's death, then its recovery enabling Brian's salvation. The time machine carries a particular weight in the Stewie mythology because it represents his intellectual capability made literal. It is not a fantasy. It is not something he wishes for. It is something he built, from scratch, presumably using materials obtained within or near the Griffin household. Its existence is a constant, quiet reminder that Stewie's intelligence is not merely a comic conceit. He is, within the world of the show, actually capable of what he claims to be capable of. The device works, and that changes things. It means that every moment of apparent normalcy in Stewie's life exists against the background of someone who could, if he chose to, do almost anything. Section 12. Stewie's legacy, cultural impact, and the world he left behind. By August of 2026, as this script is being written, Stewie Griffin has existed for more than 27 years. He has appeared in more than 400 episodes of Family Guy, one direct-to-video feature film, dozens of short films and promotional pieces, and countless video games and merchandise products. He is one of the most widely recognized animated characters in the world, instantly identifiable by his voice, his accent, his physical appearance, and his specific attitude toward everything around him. His catchphrases have entered the language in the way that the catchphrases of great television characters always do, not just among viewers of the show, but among people who have absorbed them secondhand, through cultural proximity, through clips shared on social media, through the osmosis of living in a world where a character as distinctive as Stewie becomes part of the ambient cultural environment. Victory is mine. What the deuce? Blast. Damn you, vile woman. These are not just funny lines. They are recognizable expressions of a very specific sensibility, and that sensibility has proven remarkably durable across the decades. The physical image of Stewie, the red overalls, the yellow shirt, the football-shaped head, the slightly imperious posture, is one of the most replicated figures in Halloween costume history. He shows up on t-shirts worn by people who may have never sat down and watched a full episode of Family Guy, but who know exactly who he is and what he represents. He is a cultural shorthand for a certain kind of sophisticated contempt, the person in the room who is tolerating everyone else only because they have not yet found a better option. Seth MacFarlane's vocal performance has won 5 Emmy Awards over the course of the show's run, including multiple wins for outstanding voiceover performance. This is, by any measure, an extraordinary sustained achievement, the kind that comes not from a lucky moment or a particularly good season, but from maintaining a very high standard of craft across an enormously long period of time. Stewie is one of 4 major characters MacFarlane voices, and each of them has been maintained with the specificity and consistency that makes them feel like distinct, complete beings rather than variations on a single voice. That's Stewie, the most technically demanding of the 4, the most characteristically specific, the one with the most to sustain and the most to lose from a moment of inconsistency, remains as precisely rendered in Season 23 as he was in Season 1 is genuinely remarkable. The impact of Stewie Griffin on animated television more broadly is hard to measure precisely but easy to observe. Before Stewie, the evil genius villain in animated comedy was largely confined to Saturday morning cartoons aimed at children characters whose villainy was broad, cartoonish, and entirely unthreatening. Stewie brought something new to the adult animated space. A villain figure whose intelligence was genuine, whose contempt for the world was articulated with wit and precision, and whose darkness was played against a background of genuine emotional complexity. The character demonstrated that you could write a genuinely threatening protagonist in animation without sacrificing the character's humanity or the show's comedy, that these things could coexist, reinforce each other, and produce something more interesting than either one alone. Characters in animation and in comedy more broadly have been influenced by Stewie in ways both direct and indirect. The archetype of the precocious, sophisticated, slightly menacing child character present in everything from Gravity Falls to Phineas and Ferb to any number of animated series that followed Family Guy into the adult animation space owes something to what McFarlane created. In 1999, the specific combination of intellectual superiority and emotional complexity that defines Stewie at his best has become a recognizable template, even when the characters drawing from it are not consciously aware of the debt. The direct-to-video film from 2005, Stewie Griffin, The Untold Story, deserves its own brief consideration in any accounting of the character's cultural legacy. Released in September 2005, in the middle of the show's successful revival period, the film was an 88-minute adventure in which Stewie, following a near-death experience, travels to the future to meet a man he believes might be his real father, only to discover that the man is actually himself as an adult. The future Stewie, going by the name Stu, is a middle-aged, working-class, somewhat defeated man, the polar opposite of everything baby Stewie has planned for himself. The film uses this encounter to ask what all of Stewie's elaborate planning ultimately amounts to, whether the ambitions of an extraordinary infant can survive contact with the grinding, ordinary reality of adult life. It is not the deepest piece of work, but it is charming and genuinely funny in places, and it demonstrates how strong a premise Stewie is when given sufficient space to develop. The merchandise universe around Stewie is vast and continues to grow. Action figures, plush toys, bobbleheads, board games, video games, the character has been reproduced in essentially every medium that licensed merchandising occupies. This commercial success is itself a form of cultural impact, because it means that Stewie Griffin has been physically present in the homes and lives of people who relate to him, who find something in his specific combination of qualities that speaks to them enough to want an object representing him in their physical space. And then there is the announcement that changed everything about what Stewie's future looks like. On the 12th of March, 2026, Fox announced a 2-season order for a new animated series, simply titled Stewie, a Family Guy spin-off, centered entirely on the youngest Griffin, set to premiere during the 2027-28 television season. Seth MacFarlane returns as voice actor and executive producer. Kirker Butler, who has been writing Family Guy episodes for over 2 decades, serves as showrunner. The series will stream next day on Hulu and internationally on Disney+. The premise, as Fox described it, involves Stewie being expelled from his original preschool and forced to enroll in a new one that is, by his standards, deeply inferior. His new classmates are unknown quantities. The class pet is a 75-year-old turtle with opinions about everything. Everyone is miserable until Stewie begins deploying his array of scientific devices to take the class anywhere in space and time, turning ordinary preschool days into extraordinary adventures. The description is promising. It gives Stewie the independence that his later years on Family Guy somewhat denied him, placing him in a setting where he is the primary protagonist, the driver of the narrative, the central creative force, rather than one member of an ensemble. It reconnects the character, at least conceptually, to his inventive, scheme-focused origins. The devices are back, the time travel is back, and Stewie is once again in charge of his own story. The presence of Brian in a recurring role suggests that the show will not abandon the friendship that has defined so much of Stewie's later characterization, but placing him in a new environment with new characters creates space for the show to find something fresh. The voice cast announced in July 2026 added Kenan Thompson, Vanessa Bayer, Melissa O'Neill, Aaron Lee, and Jessica Lowe to the ensemble, with Mike Henry returning to the Family Guy universe voicing a new character. The cast suggests a show with genuine ambition. These are performers with real comedic range, capable of creating genuine supporting characters rather than simply providing background voices. McFarlane's statement on the spin-off was characteristically dry and self-aware. I'd like to thank Fox for this incredible opportunity, and I'm excited to start pretending I'm collaborating closely with them on the show. It is exactly the kind of comment that Stewie himself might make, formally appreciative, subtly contemptuous, and completely honest about the nature of the transaction involved. The creator and the character remain, in some fundamental way, the same sensibility. Section 13. What could have been the road not taken? It is worth spending some time with what might have been, because any honest accounting of Stewie Griffin's story requires acknowledging the creative path that was not taken along with the one that was. The evil genius baby was, at the time of the show's original run, genuinely unprecedented. There had never been a character quite like him in adult animation, and the evidence suggests that there was significant creative territory left unexplored when the decision was made to gradually retire that iteration of the character. The argument made at the time that the world domination and Lois-killing routine had been exhausted does not fully hold up when you consider how many seasons the show subsequently ran with a fundamentally different version of the same character. If the show found enough material to sustain Stewie through more than 15 additional seasons as an emotionally complex companion figure, then the suggestion that the evil genius had run its creative course deserves scrutiny. A character whose entire premise is that he is an infant, with no limits on his intellectual and technological capabilities, could theoretically go anywhere. New weapons, new schemes, new targets beyond Lois, new allies and enemies drawn from the wider world of the show. The concept was not a single joke with a single punchline. It was an engine that could generate stories indefinitely. In the same way that a character like Roger from American Dad, who can adopt an infinite number of alternate personas, has proven to be an essentially inexhaustible creative resource. The comparison to Roger is instructive. American Dad, which premiered alongside Family Guy's Season 4 return and was created by McFarlane and some of the same original Family Guy writing staff, maintained its character development with significantly more care than Family Guy managed. Stan Smith grew and changed while remaining recognizably himself. The family dynamics evolved without losing their essential warmth, and Roger, who could have become a static gimmick, instead became one of the most creatively dynamic characters in animated television, precisely because the writers found a structural solution to the problem of sustaining an outlandish premise over the long term. The question worth asking about Stewie is whether a similar structural solution might have been available, a way of maintaining the evil genius at his core, while finding fresh expressions and applications for that genius in each new season. The evidence of the spin-off announcement suggests that this question has been reopened. The premise of Stewie, the expelled preschooler, the devices, the time travel, the space adventures is clearly an attempt to reconnect the character to the original concept in a new context. It is, in some sense, a second chance at the road not taken. What made early Stewie truly irreplaceable was the combination of genuine threat and genuine comedy, the fact that within the world of the show, his plans were real, his capabilities were real, and the gap between his world-threatening ambitions and his physical helplessness as an infant was the source of an essentially infinite supply of comic tension. When you lose the threat, when Stewie becomes a figure whose schemes are largely absent or are played as nostalgic callbacks rather than ongoing plot elements, you lose something that cannot be fully replaced by emotional complexity, however well executed. The best version of Stewie Griffin that can be imagined is not the simple evil genius of Season 1, which was complete but limited, nor the emotionally complex companion figure of Seasons 8 through 23, which has real depth but has lost something essential. It is something that neither version fully achieved: a character who maintains the genuine dangerousness and the genuine intellectual ambition of the original, while developing the emotional interiority and the relational depth that the post-revival seasons unlocked. A character who still wants to take over the world, still has the weapons and the devices, still views most of humanity with sovereign contempt, but who also loves his best friend with a ferocity that can move the audience to genuine feeling. That character exists in individual moments scattered throughout the show's long run. He exists in Brian and Stewie in Season 8, where the genuine love is visible through the carefully maintained armor. He exists in Christmas Guy, in the moment Stewie grabs Brian and holds on. He exists in Send in Stewie, Please, in the room with the psychologist, when the accent drops and something real comes through. He is not entirely absent from the character's history. He is just not consistently present, not sustained, not fully realized. The spin-off is, among other things, an opportunity, not a guarantee, not a solution, but an opportunity, a chance to take everything that has been learned about this character over 25 plus years and put it to use in a setting designed from the ground up to express who he actually is. Whether that opportunity will be seized is something only time will reveal. Section 14. The full arc Stewie Griffin from beginning to now. Let us bring it all together. Stewie Griffin began as an act of pure creative imagination, a concept so clean and so specific that it seemed, in retrospect, inevitable. A one-year-old infant with a British accent, a collection of laser guns, and plans for world domination. He was designed in conscious tribute to Alfred Hitchcock and James Bond and Rex Harrison and the long tradition of sophisticated villainy in British cinema and literature, and he was placed inside an animated family sitcom in a way that created immediate, inexhaustible comic tension between his ambitions and his reality. In his original form, in those first 3 seasons of Family Guy, he was one of the most original characters in the history of animated television. He was funny in ways that required craft and consistency to sustain. He was threatening in ways that were playful and exhilarating rather than disturbing. He had emotional complexity beneath the armor of his villainy, the love for Rupert, the complicated feelings about Lois, the beginnings of genuine friendship with Brian that hinted at something larger than the evil genius routine alone. The cancellation and revival of Family Guy interrupted the development of this character at a specific and consequential moment, early enough that the original vision had not exhausted itself. But after a 3-year gap in which the writing staff had changed, the audience's expectations had shifted, and the creator's own creative priorities had evolved. The character who returned in Season 4 was recognizably Stewie, but he was already in the process of becoming a different version of himself. That evolution, over the course of 15-plus additional seasons, produced something that was neither the original character nor a simple degradation of it, something genuinely new, with its own merits and its own limitations. The post-revival Stewie is a character of extraordinary emotional depth, capable of genuine warmth and genuine heartbreak, animated by a friendship that has become one of the most affecting relationships in animated television. He has had moments of genuine brilliance. Brian and Stewie, Road to the Multiverse, Send in Stewie, Please, Christmas Guy that justify the decades of investment in who he is. What he lost, in the transition, was the thing that made him irreplaceable, the evil genius, the ongoing campaign against the world, the sense that this 1-year-old in a diaper might, if the right circumstances aligned, actually succeed in taking over the planet. When that was gone, something genuinely unique departed from American television, and nothing quite like it has arrived to take its place. But Stewie himself is still there, still voiced with extraordinary skill by the man who created him, still possessed of the specific intelligence and the specific contempt and the specific vulnerability that have always defined him at his best. Still, at his most interesting moments, the character who came closest in American animation to suggesting that the gap between a baby and a supervillain might be smaller than we think. And now, with the spin-off arriving in 2027, there is the possibility of something new. A fresh context, new characters, new adventures. The devices and the time travel and the space exploration that the character was always best suited for, deployed in a setting designed around his capabilities rather than in spite of them. It may not work. Television spin-offs are difficult things, and the history of animated spin-offs is not uniformly encouraging. But the possibility is real, and possibility is not nothing. Stewie Griffin has been, across more than a quarter-century, several different things to several different audiences. To the viewers who found him in 1999, he was a revelation proof that animated television could sustain a genuinely original concept with genuine craft and consistency. To the viewers who came to him through Adult Swim reruns in 2003 and 2004, he was a discovery, a character whose intelligence and specificity were immediately magnetic. To the viewers who have grown up with the show through its middle and later seasons, he is something more personal, a character whose emotional life has become familiar, whose friendships feel real, and whose history is their history too. All of these Stewies are real. All of these audiences are right about what they love. And all of these versions of the character are part of a single extraordinary story, the story of how a young animator from Connecticut, inspired by Hitchcock and Bond and Rex Harrison, created something that has lasted and mattered and changed, in ways both intended and not, for longer than most television characters ever manage. Victory is mine. It is the simplest of his catchphrases. It is the one that encapsulates, in 3 words, everything that Stewie Griffin was originally designed to be. The supreme confidence, the certainty of outcome, the complete lack of self-doubt in the face of seemingly insurmountable obstacles. He has been through a great deal since those words were first spoken. That tiny figure in the yellow shirt and the red overalls, standing in the middle of a chaotic family home and declaring his mastery of a world that could not even hear him. He has changed, and not always in ways the original vision would have chosen, but he is still there, still extraordinary in his own particular way. Still, for those of us who have been watching all along, one of the great characters in the history of television. So let the night settle around you wherever you are. Let your breathing slow down and find its own rhythm. Let the weight of the day lift a little and recede into the background. You have just spent a considerable amount of time with one of the most remarkable characters in the history of American animation. That is not a bad way to spend an evening. If you enjoyed this journey through Stewie Griffin's entire story, please do go ahead and like this video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. It genuinely matters, and it helps make more of these long, slow, thorough explorations possible. Drop a comment before you drift off. Tell me which era of Stewie is your favorite, whether you think the evil genius should have stayed longer, and whether you're excited about the 2027 spin-off. I read every single comment, and those conversations are some of my favorite parts of making this channel. Sleep well, dream of world domination, and I will see you in the next one. This script was written for Uncle Guy Lore, an ASMR lore channel covering animated television history. All content is intended for relaxation and educational enjoyment. Section 15. The voice behind the character Seth MacFarlane and the craft of Stewie? To truly understand Stewie Griffin, you have to understand the specific nature of the performance that brings him to life. Because in animation, the voice is not simply a technical component of the character, it is the character. The physical design, the writing, the story arcs, all of these things matter, but the voice is the irreducible core. Take away Seth MacFarlane's voice performance, and what you have is a collection of drawings. Add it back and you have Stewie Griffin. MacFarlane has said in interviews that the vocal inspiration for Stewie came primarily from Rex Harrison, the English stage and film actor best known for his performance as Henry Higgins in the original Broadway production and the 1964 film adaptation of My Fair Lady. Harrison was, among other things, famous for a specific quality in his speech, an upper-class British inflection combined with a slightly theatrical emphasis that made even ordinary sentences sound like pronouncements. He spoke the way someone speaks when they have never, in their entire life, been uncertain about whether they belong in the room they are standing in. That quality of absolute social confidence, of someone who considers the social order a minor inconvenience that they are above engaging with, is the foundation of Stewie's vocal identity. But MacFarlane took that foundation and built something considerably more complex on top of it. The Stewie voice is not simply a Rex Harrison impression. It incorporates elements of older British actors from the golden age of British cinema, the clipped consonants, the elongated vowels, the slightly exaggerated precision of someone who has been trained to project to the back of a theater. It has notes of the classic villain voice from adventure serials and Bond films, measured, controlled, slightly contemptuous. And it has its own specific rhythms and emphases that belong entirely to Stewie and to no one else. The technical challenge of performing this voice consistently across hundreds of episodes over more than 25 years is genuinely formidable. Voices change. The physical apparatus of vocal production, the resonances, the tensions, the specific way sounds form in the body shifts over time in ways that can make sustained character voices difficult to maintain. MacFarlane has spoken about the conscious effort required to keep all 4 of his primary Family Guy characters, Peter, Brian, Stewie, and Quagmire, consistent over the decades. Each requires its own specific physical configuration, its own placement, its own breath support. Stewie, with his specific register and his specific accent, may be the most demanding of the 4. The performance also has to accommodate an extraordinary range of emotional content. In the early seasons, Stewie is almost exclusively cold, controlled, superior. The emotional palette is deliberately narrow: contempt, amusement, irritation, the occasional flash of dangerous excitement when a plan comes together. But as the character evolved through the middle and later seasons, MacFarlane was required to access far more emotional range through that same specific vocal apparatus: grief, love, fear, vulnerability, longing, the particular kind of hurt that comes from being betrayed by someone you trusted. All of this had to be expressed through Stewie's voice, through that specific accent and register, without losing the essential quality that makes the character recognizable. The performance in Brian and Stewie is the most striking demonstration of this range. In that episode, the voice that delivers Stewie's revelation about his feelings for Brian, about what Brian means to him, about how he would be affected by Brian's absence, is still unmistakably Stewie's voice. The accent is intact, the precision is there, but the emotional content is completely different from anything the voice had been required to carry in the early seasons. It is the same instrument playing a different kind of music, and the continuity between the two expressions, the cold, intellectual superiority of Season 1 and the warm, frightened love of Season 8, is what makes the character feel whole rather than fractured. The Send in Stewie, Please episode pushed the performance further still, requiring MacFarlane to take the voice in directions that had never been attempted, including the moment where the accent drops entirely, where the carefully constructed British persona gives way to something raw and more American. The simplicity of that moment, the ease with which it happens, is the result of an extraordinary amount of technical control. To be able to drop a voice you have been performing for 17 years, in a way that feels natural rather than theatrical, requires a level of craft that deserves genuine admiration. MacFarlane has also brought his considerable musical background to Stewie over the years, in the show's various musical numbers and in the Road to episodes specifically. Each Road to episode contains at least one musical sequence, and these sequences, typically performed by Brian and Stewie as a duet, require a different kind of vocal performance than the spoken dialogue. The songs need to carry emotional weight while remaining in character, which means that even in a musical number, Stewie's voice has to communicate both the content of the song and the specific perspective of the person singing it. The song in Road to Rhode Island, the first and arguably most beloved of these musical sequences, manages to be genuinely touching while also being genuinely funny, which is one of the harder things to achieve in any medium, and which succeeds in large part because of the quality of the vocal performance. The Emmy wins that MacFarlane has accumulated for his voice work on Family Guy 5 in total, with multiple nominations, are a reasonable external measure of what the industry thinks of the work. But the more meaningful measure is simpler than that. After more than 25 years, Stewie Griffin still sounds like Stewie Griffin. The voice has not drifted, has not been gradually replaced by something adjacent but not quite right, has not succumbed to the accumulated wear of decades of performance. It is still the specific, irreplaceable thing it was in January of 1999. That is the real achievement. Section 16. The Stewie and Brian Dynamic. An unlikely friendship examined. No examination of Stewie Griffin's story can be complete without a thorough consideration of the one relationship that has defined the character's middle and later life more than any other: his friendship with Brian Griffin, the family dog. This friendship, which began as a convenient narrative device in the show's earliest seasons and gradually became one of the most affecting relationships in animated comedy, is the emotional core around which all of Stewie's post-revival character development has been organized. In the very beginning, the Brian-Stewie dynamic was defined primarily by Brian's unique ability to understand Stewie. Most characters in the show cannot hear Stewie as coherent speech. They perceive him as babbling, as baby sounds, as the unremarkable vocalizations of an infant who has not yet learned to form real words. Brian, for reasons the show has never fully explained and has been smart enough never to try to explain, hears Stewie clearly. He understands every word. He can have a real conversation with him. This is a powerful narrative premise because it means that Brian is, from Stewie's perspective, the only available interlocutor in his immediate environment. Stewie can talk to Rupert, but Rupert never responds. He can address the world at large, but the world at large cannot hear him. Brian is the one being in his daily life with whom he can actually exchange words, and this fact, regardless of anything else about their respective personalities or the nature of their connection, creates an intimacy that would not otherwise exist. In the early seasons, Brian responds to this situation with the slightly bemused detachment of someone who is aware that they have an unusual relationship but is not sure what to do about it. He can understand Stewie. He acknowledges Stewie's schemes and plans with a mild, half-interested equanimity. He does not try to stop Stewie or expose him or turn him into some relevant authority. He just talks to him, engages with him, treats him, in a slightly distracted way, as a conversational partner. This early dynamic is laid out clearly in the first Road to episode, Road to Rhode Island, which is also the first episode to really center the Brian-Stewie relationship as something worth exploring in its own right. Thrown together by the logistics of a cross-country trip, without the usual family context that positions them in relation to everyone else, Brian and Stewie discover something they did not know they had: genuine compatibility. They make each other laugh. They are interested in each other's perspectives in ways that neither of them had fully acknowledged before. And they discover on that highway, in whatever state they happen to be walking through, that the company is good. The progression from that first shared road trip to the profound mutual attachment demonstrated in Christmas Guy and Brian and Stewie is one of the more carefully built arcs in the show's history. It is not done in great dramatic strokes or deliberate plot construction. It happens in the accumulation of small moments, episodes where Brian helps Stewie, episodes where Stewie helps Brian, episodes where they fail each other and have to recover, episodes where the depth of what they mean to each other is visible in the way they move through a shared situation. It is the kind of character development that is easy to miss in individual episodes because it is subtle, but that becomes overwhelming when you watch it across the decades and see how far they have traveled together. What makes the friendship so interesting dramatically is that it exists between two very different kinds of being. Brian is, for all his pretensions to intellectual sophistication, fundamentally a social creature. He wants to be liked. He wants to be accepted. He wants to belong to something larger than himself. His ambitions, the unfinished novel, the longing for romantic love, the desire to be taken seriously as a writer are recognizably human ambitions, motivated by a recognizably human desire for recognition and connection. Stewie is almost the opposite. He does not want to be liked. He considers the need for approval a weakness. His ambitions, world domination, technological superiority, the establishment of his absolute authority over all of existence are not motivated by a desire for connection, but by a desire for power. He does not want to belong. He wants to rule, and yet they are friends. Deeply, genuinely, consequentially friends. The question of how and why is one that the show has explored from various angles across more than 2 decades, and it has never arrived at a clean or simple answer, which is probably why the friendship retains its capacity to surprise and affect. It does not reduce to a formula. It does not make sense in any simple way. It is the kind of friendship that exists not because the two parties are particularly well suited to each other in any rational calculus, but because they met at a specific moment in both their lives and found, against all reasonable expectation, that the other person was exactly what they needed. Brian needs Stewie because Stewie is the one person in his life who does not require Brian to perform. Brian, around most of the characters in the show, is always partly in performance, maintaining his intellectual persona, projecting the image of the sophisticated, well-read, thoughtful dog who is slightly too good for his surroundings. Stewie sees through this immediately and completely. He has a better mind than Brian and knows it, and he does not allow Brian to pretend otherwise. In Stewie's company, Brian does not have to be the smartest person in the room because he never is, and that is, paradoxically, liberating. He can simply be present without the exhausting effort of maintaining a persona that does not quite fit. Stewie needs Brian because Brian is the only person who actually responds to him, not just hears him, responds to him, engages with him, treats him as a conversational partner rather than as an infant making sounds. The isolation of Stewie's situation, this extraordinary intelligence trapped in a body that the world dismisses as a baby, surrounded by beings who cannot hear or understand him, is one of the more quietly poignant facts of his existence, and Brian's capacity to hear and engage is not a small thing. It is everything. It is the difference between existing entirely within your own head and existing in relationship to another being. The friendship has not always been smooth, and some of the show's most dramatically effective Brian Stewie episodes have centered on its ruptures and repairs. Brian Wright's a bestseller from season 9 showed Brian at his most selfish and Stewie at his most genuinely hurt, wounded by the betrayal of someone whose regard he had come to value more than he was entirely comfortable admitting. The repair of that situation, like the repairs of many ruptures in their friendship, is not particularly articulated. It happens in the background, in the resumed normalcy of subsequent episodes, in the quiet reestablishment of their shared routines. This is true to how real friendships work, not through grand reconciliation scenes and explicit forgiveness, but through the simple decision to continue. The time travel arc in Season 12, Brian's death in Life of Brian, and Stewie's rescue of him in Christmas Guy, is the most extreme test the friendship undergoes, and it is passed in the most extreme way possible. Stewie, faced with the loss of the only person who matters to him in the way Brian matters to him, does the impossible. He figures out a way, despite having destroyed his own time machine, to get the device back. He travels back. He saves Brian. He does this not for any strategic reason, not for any benefit to himself, not because it is part of a plan, but purely because the alternative is a world without Brian in it, and that is a world Stewie has decided he is not willing to inhabit. That is love, expressed in Stewie's specific, unlikely way through technology and time travel and the careful manipulation of temporal paradoxes, but love nonetheless. It is one of the most moving things the show has ever done with either character, and it earns its emotional weight because of everything that came before it. Every small moment, and every shared adventure, and every quiet expression of mutual regard that the show had been accumulating since 1999. Section 17. The Stewie mythology weapons, time machines, and the world inside the crib. One of the great pleasures of watching Stewie Griffin across the decades is the accumulated mythology of his specific capabilities and the specific world he has built within and around the Griffin household. This is not simply the story of a funny baby with a British accent. It is the story of an extraordinary engineer, an inventor of genuinely world-altering technology, who has chosen to operate within the constraints of what looks like a perfectly ordinary infant's bedroom in a perfectly ordinary Rhode Island house. The weapons collection is the most immediately visible element of this mythology. From the first season onward, Stewie's bedroom contains an assortment of devices that would be remarkable in any context, but are particularly remarkable given that they have apparently been assembled by a 1-year-old using materials that fit within the domestic environment of a middle-class home. There are laser guns of various sizes and capabilities. There are mind control devices. There is a weather machine. There are explosives of various yields. There are defensive systems. There are offensive systems. There are devices whose specific function the show never quite explains, but that clearly represent serious technological capability. The laser gun is the most iconic of these, and it appears often enough throughout the series to be considered almost as much a part of Stewie's visual identity as his overalls. He holds it with the practiced ease of someone who has been carrying firearms for years, which, within the show's internal logic, he has. He aims with precision, he fires with purpose, and he reacts to missing with the slight irritation of an expert whose tools have temporarily failed them, rather than with the surprise of someone encountering this situation for the first time. The time machine occupies a special place in the mythology, because it is both Stewie's most extraordinary technological achievement and, gradually, his most important narrative tool. In the early seasons, it is established that Stewie has built a functional time travel device, something he does in Season 1, apparently in response to the pain of teething, in a piece of incidental world-building that is so casual and so matter-of-fact that it passes almost unnoticed. A 1-year-old baby, bothered by the discomfort of teething, builds a time machine. This is presented as something entirely within his capabilities, something he does in the way you or I might, bothered by a headache, go looking for aspirin. The time machine becomes more central to his character as the series develops and as Brian becomes more fully his adventure partner. Many of the Road to episodes from Season 7 onward involve time travel, and the specific mechanics of Stewie's device, the return pad, the temporal targeting system, the power requirements are established with enough consistency that they feel like genuine rules rather than arbitrary conveniences. When the machine is destroyed in Life of Brian, the absence of it matters precisely because the show has spent years making clear exactly what the machine can do and why its loss is devastating. The bedroom itself, in these early seasons, is worth considering as a space. From the outside, it looks like a perfectly ordinary infant's room crib, mobile, stuffed animals, the standard furnishings of a child's earliest years. But within that apparent normalcy, Stewie has constructed an entirely different kind of space, a laboratory, a workshop, an operations center from which his various campaigns are planned and executed. The gap between the innocent appearance of the space and its actual function is another expression of the core Stewie joke, the utterly ordinary surface concealing the extraordinary and dangerous interior. What this mythology communicates, taken as a whole, is that Stewie Griffin is not simply clever. He is a genuine technological genius of a kind that the world has never before encountered. Within the logic of the show, he can build things that do not exist anywhere else in human civilization, devices that operate on principles that human science has not yet understood or implemented. The time machine alone places him in a category entirely separate from anything in the ordinary world. He is not smart for a baby. He is smart for anyone, in a category of intelligence that transcends age and experience and every normal measure of human capability. The question the show has always slightly sidestepped is what this means for the world. If Stewie has the capability to build a functional time machine, if he can construct weapons of extraordinary destructive power, if he has access to technology that does not exist anywhere else on Earth, why has he not already taken over the world? The early seasons answered this question with the dramatic irony of the situation. He keeps being thwarted by circumstances, by bad timing, by the inherent unpredictability of a world too chaotic to fully control. He has the capability. He does not always have the opportunity. As the show evolved and the world domination schemes receded, this question became less pressing because Stewie was no longer primarily organized around the project of conquest. The devices remained, and were deployed in the Road to adventures and in various individual episode plots. But the overarching campaign, the sustained effort to turn his technological superiority into actual global control, gradually faded until it existed only as an occasional callback or a moment of nostalgic humor. What remained was the technology itself, now deployed in the service of adventure rather than conquest, and this redeployment is, arguably, the most honest possible expression of who Stewie is at his deepest level. He did not build the time machine because he wanted to rule the world. He built it because he could, because building it was interesting, because the problem of time travel represented an intellectual challenge worthy of his capabilities, and solving intellectual challenges worthy of his capabilities is, ultimately, what Stewie Griffin most fundamentally is. The spin-off premise, Stewie deploying his devices to take his preschool class on adventures through space and time, is, in this light, not a departure from the character but a return to something essential. The devices are the character. The intellectual capability that produces them is the character. Whatever the political project of that capability happens to be in any given moment, world domination, adventure, simple exploration, is secondary to the fact of the capability itself. Section 18. Meg, Chris, Lois, and Peter Stewie's relationship with the Griffin family. Stewie Griffin exists necessarily within a family, and his relationships with each member of that family have their own distinct character and their own contribution to who he is. Beyond the central dynamic with Brian, these relationships have been present throughout the show's run, sometimes in the foreground and sometimes barely visible, but always part of the texture of his existence. The Stewie-Lois relationship is, of course, the foundational dynamic of the character, the original engine that powered everything in the first 3 seasons. The joke, as discussed at length earlier, was one of the most sustainably funny things the show ever built. Lois, warm and maternal and completely oblivious, caring for the one child in her household who is actively plotting her destruction. The dramatic irony of this situation we know, Stewie knows, Lois does not know, was the source of enormous comic pleasure across those early seasons. As Stewie evolved away from the matricide obsession, the Lois relationship evolved with him. The antagonism never entirely disappeared. It would surface occasionally in asides and callbacks, reminding the audience of where the character had come from, but it was no longer the defining feature of their relationship. What emerged in its place was something more complicated and, in some ways, more interesting. A mother-child relationship that is genuinely loving on Lois's side and genuinely ambivalent on Stewie's. Stewie, in the later seasons, clearly has feelings for Lois that go beyond his original murderous contempt. Stewie loves Lois is the most extreme expression of this. The episode where Stewie's gratitude for Lois's care tips over into complete maternal devotion. But even in more ordinary episodes, there are moments where the love is visible. He wants her attention. He is pleased when she notices him. He responds to her affection in ways that, if not exactly reciprocal in the conventional sense, are not the simple rejection of an enemy's overtures. The Stewie kills Lois two-parter can be read, in this light, not just as the farewell to the evil genius routine, but as the most honest statement the show ever made about what Stewie actually feels about his mother. The simulation reveals, among other things, that he has thought about this scenario in great detail, has modeled it, has imagined every contingency, has projected the consequences with his characteristic thoroughness. And what the simulation shows him is that killing Lois does not produce the liberation he anticipated. The world he has been planning to rule, freed from her interference, is not the world he actually wants. What he actually wants is something he cannot fully articulate, but that has something to do with the continuation of the relationship, even this complicated, asymmetrical, occasionally murderous relationship. The Stewie-Peter relationship is less thoroughly explored than the Stewie-Lois relationship, but it has its own specific character. Peter, in Stewie's assessment, is essentially beneath consideration, an entity of such limited capability and such transparent motivation that engaging with him seriously is not worth the effort. Stewie refers to Peter as the fat man, with a consistent, affectionate contempt that places him clearly in the category of things Stewie has to work around rather than things he has to take seriously. Peter is a weather phenomenon, large, unpredictable, occasionally disruptive to Stewie's plans, but fundamentally not a conscious opposition. You do not plot against a weather phenomenon. You simply account for it in your calculations. The episodes that bring Peter and Stewie together more directly, the courtship of Stewie's father, from Season 4 being the most significant reveal, something unexpected and oddly touching about the relationship. When Peter puts in the effort to actually engage with Stewie, when he treats his youngest son not as a household fixture but as an actual person he is interested in spending time with, Stewie responds. He cannot help it. The desire for a father's attention is apparently not entirely outside his emotional range, even if he would be appalled to acknowledge it directly. Meg and Stewie's relationship has changed significantly over the course of the show's run. In the early seasons, they barely interact. Meg is the teenager, absorbed in her own social crises, and Stewie is the baby, conducting his separate campaigns. They occupy different floors of the house, both literally and metaphorically. But as the show's treatment of Meg became more extreme in the middle seasons, the relentless abuse, the family contempt, the sustained cruelty, Stewie became one of the participants in that treatment. His comments about Meg during these seasons were not always kind, and his participation in the family's collective dismissal of her was part of the pattern that made those seasons difficult for viewers who cared about Meg as a character. In the later seasons, as the show pulled back from the worst of Meg's treatment, Stewie's relationship with her was quietly recalibrated. He is not presented as having had a sudden change of heart. The show does not make grand narrative gestures about it, but he is more frequently positioned as something other than an antagonist or an indifferent bystander. There are episodes in the later seasons where Stewie and Meg interact with something approaching genuine mutual regard, where his intelligence finds something to appreciate in her resilience, or where her experience as the family's designated outsider resonates with his own experience of existing slightly apart from the world around him. Chris and Stewie, similarly, have a relationship that is more peripheral than central to either character's story. Chris is the good-natured, somewhat clueless middle son, and Stewie's interactions with him tend to be tinged with the specific contempt that Stewie reserves for beings who are neither genuinely malevolent nor particularly capable. The contempt of someone who does not know what to do, with well-meaning mediocrity. But there are individual episodes that find more warmth between them than the baseline dynamic suggests, and the sibling relationship, however underexplored, is part of the texture of Stewie's family life. Section 19. Stewie and Pop Culture. The character beyond the show. Stewie Griffin's impact on popular culture extends far beyond what can be measured in television ratings or episode viewership. He has become, over more than 25 years, something more than a television character, a kind of cultural archetype, a recognizable type that has been absorbed into the broader language of comedy and of social behavior. The archetype he represents is something like this: the supremely intelligent, supremely contemptuous entity who is forced, by circumstances entirely outside their control, to exist among beings significantly below their level. This is a recognizable figure in comedy and in literature, from the Wilden wit surrounded by Victorian Philistines to the too clever for this town intellectual stranded in a place that cannot appreciate them. What Stewie does is push this archetype to its logical and most absurd extreme, placing a being of literally superhuman intelligence, armed with genuinely world-threatening technology, inside the body of a 1-year-old baby who still needs his diaper changed. The comedy of this situation works in part because it is relatable in a sideways kind of way. Most people have, at some point in their lives, felt the specific frustration of being surrounded by people who cannot quite hear them, who miss the point of what they are saying, who underestimate them, who treat them as something they are not. Stewie's situation is an extreme, cartoonish, violent version of this very ordinary human experience. And the way he responds to it with elaborate planning, with maintained dignity, with a refusal to reduce himself to the terms that the world around him tries to impose, is satisfying in the same way that fantasy is satisfying. It is what you would do if you had his particular resources. The catchphrases associated with Stewie have moved through the culture in the way that only the most deeply embedded catchphrases do they have become. Not just quotations from a television show, but standalone expressions that function independently of their source. "Victory is mine" does not require context. It communicates immediately the declaration of triumphant superiority, the announcement that whatever small contest was being conducted has been conclusively resolved in the speaker's favor. It is used on social media, in text messages, in conversations by people who may not even be active Family Guy viewers. It has entered the language. "What the deuce" is a similar case, a slightly antiquated British exclamation that Stewie uses to express confusion or outrage that has been picked up as a quotable response to unexpected or absurd situations. It carries his specific character with it when it is deployed, communicating the particular quality of incredulous sophistication that is his signature response to the world's persistent failure to meet his expectations. The Halloween costume phenomenon is one of the clearest measures of a character's cultural penetration. Stewie's costume, red overalls, yellow shirt, the distinctive head shape achieved through various prosthetic and hat solutions has been one of the most consistently popular animated character costumes for more than 2 decades. It is simple enough to execute quickly, recognizable enough to communicate instantly, and associated with enough personality that wearing it says something specific about the wearer's sense of humor and their relationship to the character. The people who dress as Stewie for Halloween are, in a small way, performing the character, adopting his posture, attempting his expressions, maybe attempting the voice. They are not simply wearing a costume. They are briefly inhabiting an archetype that means something to them. The internet has been particularly generative territory for Stewie-related content. The character's specific qualities, the articulate expression of frustration, the elaborate contempt for ordinary things, the precise and devastating observation translate beautifully to the formats that internet comedy favors. Reaction images using Stewie's expressions have been widely circulated. Clips from the show, particularly from the early seasons, have accumulated billions of views across various platforms. The character has become a reliable format for expressing certain kinds of social commentary, the "I'd like to have a word with you about" school of pointed observations, the "victory is mine" declaration for minor personal triumphs, the elaborate contempt for things that are merely annoying, expressed with the vocabulary of someone planning a military campaign. The merchandise universe that Stewie has generated is, by any measure, vast. Beyond the standard action figures and plush toys, there are Stewie-themed board games. Stewie-themed video games. The character has appeared in numerous Family Guy video game releases. Over the years, Stewie-branded merchandise of seemingly every conceivable type, and a licensing presence that extends to international markets where Family Guy has found audiences far beyond the American context in which it was created. The international reach of Stewie Griffin is itself a remarkable fact. The show is broadcast and streamed in dozens of countries, and Stewie, despite being an English-language character with a specifically British-accented voice, has found audiences across cultural contexts that might not be expected to respond to his particular brand of sophistication and contempt. The universality of the archetype he represents, the supremely capable being stranded in a world that cannot appreciate them, apparently transcends cultural specificity. The specific expression is American. The feeling is human. Section 20. The 30-year question: what Stewie means now and where he is going. As Family Guy approaches its 30th anniversary, the show premiered on the 31st of January 1999 and is currently set to continue through the 2028-29 television season under its April 2025 megadeal renewal. The question of what Stewie Griffin means becomes more interesting and more complex than it was in the early seasons. In 1999, the question was simple: what is this character? The answer was equally simple: an evil genius infant with a British accent and world domination plans. This was the pitch. This was the character. This was what made him funny and original and worth paying attention to. In 2026, the question is different. Stewie Griffin is now a figure with 27 years of history, multiple iterations of himself, relationships that span decades of storytelling, and a cultural footprint large enough that he has been absorbed into the general awareness of people who have never watched the show he comes from. He is not simply a character anymore. He is a myth in the small, specific sense that word has in contemporary culture, the sense in which certain figures from popular entertainment become emblematic of something larger than their specific narrative. What Stewie is emblematic of, at his best and in his most complete form, is something like this: the possibility of existing on your own terms in a world that is designed to make that impossible. He is 1 year old and cannot control his most basic physical functions, and yet he has built a time machine and has plans for the subjugation of the entire human race. The world says he is a baby. He says the world is wrong about what he is, and he has spent more than 2 decades proving the world wrong, in his specific way, 1 episode at a time. This is, at bottom, a fantasy about autonomy, about refusing to be defined by the categories that other people assign to you, about maintaining your own sense of who you are and what you are capable of in the face of a world that persistently misreads you. It is a fantasy that resonates with almost everyone at some point in their life, and it resonates with particular intensity with people who feel themselves to be misread or underestimated or placed in a category that does not fit. The Evil Genius Baby is a funny version of a very serious experience. The evolution of the character over 27 years has layered this fundamental fantasy with additional complexity. The Stewie who emerged from the therapy room in Send in Stewie, Please is not the Stewie who plotted world domination in Season 1. He has been marked by his experiences, by his friendships, by his losses, by the accumulated weight of existing in a family that is complicated in the specific ways the Griffin family is complicated. He is not simple anymore, if he ever was. He is a figure who contains multitudes, the cold genius and the loving friend, the supremely confident planner and the frightened being who needs the company of one specific dog to feel fully like himself. The spin-off, set for 2027, represents an opportunity to take all of that complexity and deploy it in a new context to see what Stewie Griffin looks like when he is the center of his own story, with room to develop in ways that 20-plus seasons of ensemble television did not always allow. The premise is promising. The cast additions are encouraging. McFarlane's involvement as both voice actor and executive producer suggests that the character will be handled with the care that his 27-year history warrants. There is also something fitting about a character whose story has always been about refusing to be contained by the circumstances of his birth finding his way, finally, to a story that is entirely his own. Stewie Griffin has always been too large for the high chair. For the first time, the show is being built around his scale rather than asking him to fit within someone else's. Whatever happens with the spin-off, the core of Stewie Griffin's story is already complete in the sense that matters most. He has had a full arc. He has been extraordinary in his earliest form, complicated in his middle form, and genuinely moving in his best later moments. He has made people laugh for a very long time, and he has occasionally, in the quiet way that the best character work does, made people feel something real. That is enough. That is more than enough. The night has gotten quieter now, wherever you are. The hours have passed in the way they do when a story has held your attention without effort gradually, almost imperceptibly, until you look up and find that considerably more time has gone by than you expected. Your shoulders are probably lower than when we started. Your breathing has probably found a rhythm that is slower and more settled. This is what Stewie Griffin's story does. When it is told at the right pace, in the right register, with the right amount of space between the words. It holds you. It has always held the people who were willing to give it their attention. He is a 1-year-old infant in red overalls and a yellow shirt, with a football-shaped head and a British accent, and a bedroom full of weapons and a best friend who is a dog. He has been alive for 27 years and he has not aged a day. He has plans for world domination that he has never quite executed, a mother he has never quite managed to kill, and a friendship that has turned out to mean more to him than anything he ever planned. He is, in the end, Stewie Griffin. And there is no one else like him. Sleep well. Total script: Stewie Griffin's entire story explained to fall asleep to Uncle Guy lore. Research conducted using verified sources including Wikipedia, Deadline, Hollywood Reporter, IMDb, Family Guy Wiki, Fandom, Screen Rant, and multiple other documented sources. All factual claims verified at time of writing. Section 21. The season-by-season moments. Specific scenes that define the character. One of the most reliable ways to understand a character's evolution over a long run is to follow the specific scenes, the individual moments that crystallized something essential about who they are at that particular point in time. Stewie Griffin has accumulated hundreds of such moments across more than 400 episodes, and tracing a selection of them from the earliest seasons to the most recent tells a story that is more textured and more honest than any broad summary can achieve. The very first scene in which Stewie speaks with genuine clarity and sustained purpose comes in I Never Met the Dead Man, the second episode of the first season. The family's television has been destroyed by one of Peter's misadventures, and the household is plunged into a kind of domestic chaos. Stewie, meanwhile, has been working on a device that he describes, in his most careful and measured voice, as capable of controlling weather patterns over a significant geographic area. He explains the mechanism. He explains the anticipated results. He explains the timeline. And then Lois walks past and asks if he wants his bath early, and he says, with perfect measured control, I suppose that will have to wait. The bath. Not the weather machine. The bath can be accommodated within the schedule. The weather machine will have to be reorganized around her availability. This tiny moment, the weather machine subordinated to bath time, without any acknowledgement of the absurdity of the contrast, is one of the best things the show did in its entire first season. It does not underline the joke. It does not ask for a reaction. It simply presents the situation with complete confidence in its own clarity and moves on. The audience either sees it or they do not, but the show is not going to explain it to them. The scene in Road to Rhode Island where Stewie and Brian perform their musical number on the highway is another definitive moment, and it is definitive in a different way. This is not the evil genius showing his capabilities. This is two beings who have discovered, unexpectedly, that they enjoy being around each other and expressing that discovery in the particular way that musicals do, which is to say, with complete honesty disguised as spectacle. They are not performing for an audience within the world of the show. There is no one watching them on that highway. They are singing because they feel like singing, because the moment and the company and the particular quality of the late afternoon light on a long road has brought something out in both of them that they do not quite know how to handle otherwise. The scene is funny because it is absurd. It is affecting because it is entirely true. The moment in Stewie Kills Lois when Stewie finally pulls the trigger, finally does the thing he has been planning to do for 6 full seasons of television, is one of the show's great set pieces. The show plays it straight. It does not wink. It does not undercut the moment with a cutaway or a joke. Stewie shoots Lois, and Lois falls overboard, and the ship keeps moving, and the episode ends. The impact of this moment comes from the accumulated weight of 6 years of buildup. All those failed attempts, all those near misses, all those times the plan was interrupted by some domestic emergency or practical obstacle, finally resolving into an act that is presented as real. Whatever we learn later about the simulation, the emotional experience of watching this scene for the first time is the experience of watching a character actually do what they have always said they were going to do. It is startling and oddly moving and completely committed. The scene in Brian and Stewie where Stewie tells Brian what he would lose if Brian were gone is perhaps the single most emotionally significant scene in the character's history. He does not say, "I love you." He does not make a grand declaration. He says, in his careful, controlled way, that Brian's absence would leave a specific absence in his life that he cannot easily characterize, but that he recognizes as something of consequence. The vocabulary is Stewie's vocabulary, measured, slightly academic, unwilling to commit to the raw, emotional language that would feel out of character. But the content is entirely clear. He needs Brian. He does not know what he would be without him. And the fact that he is telling Brian this, in this specific situation, in a bank vault on a weekend with no escape available and nothing to distract them, is itself the most honest thing he has said to another person in the entire run of the show. The moment in Christmas Guy when Stewie grabs Brian and the camera holds on them, Stewie clutching his best friend with the desperate force of someone who has spent 3 weeks mourning him, Brian confused and slightly uncomfortable, and patting Stewie's back with careful gentleness. This is the payoff of the entire Brian-Stewie arc in its first phase. All of the friendship, all of the investment, all of the accumulated affection that the show has built across more than a decade of storytelling lands in this one image. It does not require explanation. It does not require context for anyone who has been watching. It simply is. The moment in Send in Stewie, Please, when the accent drops when Stewie, alone in a room with a therapist who has genuinely gotten under his armor, lets the British voice fall away and speaks in his actual voice, whatever that means in the context of a character whose accent has always been part of his defining identity, this is perhaps the most formally daring thing the show ever did with the character. It raises questions that are not definitively answered. It complicates the audience's relationship with a voice they have known for 17 years. And it does so in the service of a genuine insight that the public persona, however real it feels and however long it has been maintained, is a construction. That underneath the construction, something else exists. The moment asks what that something else is, and it does not entirely answer the question, because the most honest answer to that question in Stewie's life, as in most lives, is not yet fully known. Section 22. The show's relationship with its own character, meta-awareness, and self-reference. One of the more interesting aspects of Stewie Griffin's long history is the way the show has periodically turned its own critical attention on the character, acknowledging changes in his characterization, reflecting on what he used to be, sometimes commenting with apparent awareness on the gap between the early version and the current version. This self-awareness has been a feature of Family Guy more broadly. The show has a long tradition of fourth-wall breaking and meta-commentary, references to its own cancellation and revival, jokes about the quality of the writing, acknowledgments that the show has been going on for a long time, and that this creates specific creative challenges. Stewie is often the vehicle for this kind of commentary, because his intellectual superiority and his detachment from ordinary social constraints make him the most natural candidate for the character who can see and say what everyone else in the show cannot. In the episode Back to the Pilot, a Season 10 installment in which Brian and Stewie use the time machine to travel back to the events of the very first episode, there are several moments where the show reflects on the distance between what it was at the beginning and what it has become. Stewie from the present encounters Stewie from 1999, and the two interact in ways that are partly comedic and partly something else, an implicit acknowledgement of continuity and change, of the relationship between a character's origin and their current form. The show has also periodically introduced storylines that seem designed to address fan criticism of Stewie's evolution moments, where the evil genius energy returns, if briefly, as if in response to the awareness that some viewers miss what the character used to be. These callbacks are generally received warmly, because they remind the audience of what was there in the beginning, but they also tend to confirm the general direction of the character's development rather than reverse it. The visits to old Stewie are exactly that, visits. He has moved on. The Send in Stewie Please episode is the most ambitious and most sustained piece of meta-engagement with the character's history. In that therapy session, Stewie reflects on who he is and how he has come to be that way, the accent, the persona, the elaborate construction of sophistication and contempt that he has been maintaining since before the show's first episode, apparently. The session is presented as a real psychological encounter rather than a comedic premise, and it takes seriously the question of what it might mean to have lived inside a persona for as long as Stewie has lived inside his. The answer the episode arrives at, that the persona is both true and constructed, that Stewie is both the sophisticated villain and the frightened being underneath, that both of these things are real, is the most honest accounting of the character's dual nature that the show has ever attempted. It does not choose one version over the other. It says they are both there, and that the relationship between them is what makes the character interesting. The armor is real armor. built to protect something real. And what it protects is also, in its own way, a form of armor. Section 23. A final reckoning greatness, loss, and the enduring power of a single original idea. We have been together for a long time now, you and I, and Stewie, and the decades of storytelling that make up his world. Let me bring it home in the way it deserves slowly, without rushing, with the full weight of everything that has been said. Stewie Griffin is one of the great character creations in the history of American popular culture. This is not hyperbole. It is a simple statement of what the evidence supports. He was original in a way that genuine originality is rare. He was executed, particularly in his earliest form, with a precision and a consistency that reflected genuine artistic intelligence. He connected with audiences at a scale that transformed not just the show he came from, but the landscape of adult animation more broadly. And he has lasted, across more than a quarter century and hundreds of episodes, in a form that, while substantially evolved from the original, still contains the essential qualities that made him extraordinary to begin with. What was lost in the evolution of the character is real, and it is worth naming clearly. The evil genius of Season 1 was irreplaceable. The specific combination of genuine threat, genuine intelligence, and genuine humor that he embodied in those first 3 seasons has not been recreated by any subsequent character in adult animation, because the conditions that produce a genuinely original character are not reproducible on demand. McFarlane and his team arrived at something extraordinary in 1999, something that had never been done before, and the decision to gradually move away from that original vision was a decision made for understandable creative reasons, but with genuine creative cost. What was gained in the evolution of the character is also real, and equally worth naming clearly. The Stewie who has Brian as his closest friend, who has a depth of feeling that the evil genius of Season 1 could not have expressed, who can sit in a bank vault for a weekend and have a conversation that reveals something true about what it means to be alive, and to be afraid, and to love someone. This Stewie has qualities that the original character was not designed to possess. He is more human. He is more vulnerable. He is more relatably imperfect in ways that make the audience's connection to him more genuinely felt rather than simply more amused. The best version of Stewie Griffin contains both of these things. He is the evil genius and the loving friend. He is the invulnerable plotter and the being who drops his accent in a therapy room. He is the character who shoots Lois and the character who saves Brian. All of these things are Stewie, and all of these things are true, and the full arc of his story from January 1999 to wherever the spin-off takes him in 2027 and beyond is the story of how all of these different truths coexist in one extraordinary, unlikely, utterly original being. 27 years, more than 400 episodes. One voice, one performer, one character with a football-shaped head and a British accent and a laser gun and a teddy bear and a best friend who is a dog. It has been a privilege to spend this time with his story. Go to sleep. Go easy into whatever comes next. Dream of the things you are planning, the things you have built, the worlds you are about to conquer. And when you wake up, remember, victory is yours. It always was. If this video found its way to you and kept you company through the night, please do subscribe and leave that comment below where you are, what time it is, which version of Stewie you love most. Those comments are how I know you are out there, and knowing you are out there is why I keep making these. See you next time. Section 24. The World Around Stewie. How Family Guy's world shaped the character. To fully appreciate what Stewie Griffin is and what he has meant to the people who have watched him for more than 2 decades, it helps to understand the specific world he inhabits, the town, the family, the supporting cast that surrounds him, and to appreciate how that world has shaped his character in ways both obvious and subtle. Stewie lives in a town that the show calls Quahog, a fictional Rhode Island coastal city that functions as the kind of middle American suburb that has always been fertile territory for American comedy. It is not glamorous. It is not large. It is not the kind of place that would be on anyone's list of great cities. It is the kind of place where people go to the same bar for decades, where everyone knows everyone else's business, where the rhythms of daily life are comfortably predictable and slightly deadening. It is, in short, exactly the wrong place to be born if you have plans for world domination. This setting is essential to understanding why Stewie is funny. An evil genius who grows up in a world that is already chaotic and sophisticated and world historical is simply a villain. An evil genius who grows up in a comfortable Rhode Island suburb, where the biggest events on the social calendar are barbecues and local sports events and the occasional neighborhood drama, is something much more amusing. The gap between Stewie's ambitions and his environment is the gap between the infinite and the particular, between someone who thinks in terms of civilizations and someone who lives in a house where the most pressing daily concern is whether Peter will do something stupid at the drunken clam. The supporting characters who surround the Griffin family Cleveland, Joe Swanson, Quagmire, Bonnie, Doctor, Hartman, Meg's schoolmates, the various recurring figures who populate Quahog form a social world that Stewie views with the consistent contempt of someone who has been accidentally placed in the wrong universe. He does not belong here. He knows he does not belong here. And the fact that he has to exist here anyway, has to eat his pureed carrots and attend his playdates, and be strapped into his car seat for the trip to the grocery store, is the source of a frustration that fuels his plans, even as it explains why those plans always seem to be running slightly behind schedule. The town is also, importantly, populated by people who care about Stewie in the ordinary, unremarkable way that towns care about the children in their midst. The neighbors who wave at the Griffin stroller, the pediatrician who gives him his vaccinations, the adults at the playgroup who coo over him and pronounce him adorable. None of these people know that the adorable child they are cooing at is actively planning to destabilize their political system and place himself at the apex of a new global order. The world's cheerful obliviousness to Stewie's actual nature is one of the foundational comedic premises of the show, and it is sustained by the specific ordinariness of the world he inhabits. Rhode Island itself is a source of comedy for the show, a tiny state, the smallest in the Union, famous mainly for its size and its strong New England identity. The show's Rhode Island is a place with very specific local color. The accent, the geography, the cultural references, the particular quality of coastal New England life. Stewie's British accent, his formal diction, his European cultural references, stand out even more sharply against this specifically American background than they might in a more cosmopolitan setting. He sounds wrong for the place in exactly the right way. He sounds like someone who has been placed here by accident and is managing the situation with extraordinary patience and very little visible frustration. The Griffin house itself is a character in the show, a particular kind of suburban family home with specific rooms that recur episode after episode, a specific floor plan that the audience has internalized across years of watching, a specific quality of domestic space that means the house feels as real and as familiar as any actual location. Stewie's bedroom, within this house, is a constant in the show's geography, the place where his weapons are stored, where Rupert sits, where the time machine was built and eventually destroyed and rebuilt. It is his laboratory, his sanctuary, his operational headquarters. Within the ordinary physical space of a child's bedroom in a Rhode Island house, Stewie has created a world entirely his own. The broader cultural context in which the show exists has also shaped Stewie's character in ways that are worth acknowledging. Family Guy was born in 1999, at the end of a decade defined by a specific kind of American cultural optimism, the post-Cold War boom years, the dot-com era, the period when the future seemed knowable and the present seemed manageable. It returned from cancellation in 2005, after the September 11th attacks had fundamentally altered the American cultural mood, and the character who came back was measurably different in ways that cannot be entirely separated from the broader cultural shift. The easy confidence of early Stewie, the certainty that the world is a problem to be solved and that he is uniquely qualified to solve it, gives way, gradually, to something more complicated. He is still confident, but the confidence is layered now over something that was not there before, something that knows the world does not always yield to even the most carefully laid plans. This is perhaps the most sophisticated thing that can be said about Stewie Griffin's evolution, that it is not just a creative decision about a fictional character, but a reflection of the way the world changed around the show while the show was running. The character who would rule everything, who would not accept the world's terms, who would impose his own order on whatever chaos surrounded him, this character became, across 2 decades of external events and internal creative decisions, someone who has accepted that the world is not entirely conquerable, who has found, within that acceptance, something worth having: the friendship, the warmth, the relationship that makes the unconquered world bearable. There is something genuinely moving about this arc when you see it in this light. Stewie Griffin began as a fantasy of total control, the infant who would remake the world in his own image. He evolved into something more honest, a being who found that the world could not be remade, that other people were not obstacles to be eliminated, and that the best possible version of existing in an uncontrollable world was to do it alongside someone you trusted completely. This is, in its own unlikely way, wisdom, arrived at by a 1-year-old in a diaper with a collection of laser guns and a teddy bear named Rupert, but wisdom nonetheless. The kind that takes a long time to learn and that looks, from the outside, like a defeat, but that feels, from the inside, like something closer to peace. Section 25. The Voice of a Generation. Why Stewie Still Matters in 2026. It would be easy, in a conversation about a character who has been on television for 27 years, to fall into the mode of nostalgia to talk about what Stewie was and mourn what he became, to position the early seasons as an unreachable golden standard against which everything subsequent is a decline, and to treat the current version of the character as simply a diminished inheritance from a greater original. That mode is available. It has been available for years, and many fans and critics have occupied it with varying degrees of conviction. But it is not the only mode available, and it may not be the most interesting one. The more interesting conversation, at this specific moment in 2026, is about why Stewie Griffin still matters. Why a character who premiered in 1999, who has been through multiple reinventions and a creative evolution that has cost him some of his most distinctive original qualities, who is now preparing to launch into a spin-off that will take him further from his Family Guy origins than he has ever been. Why this character still commands genuine attention and genuine affection from audiences who have had more than 25 years to move on to something else. Part of the answer is simple momentum, the cultural inertia of a character who has been present and prominent for long enough that he has become part of the furniture of the culture. Stewie is there, the way certain figures are just there, absorbed into the environment so thoroughly that their absence would be registered as a kind of loss, even by people who are not actively engaged with the work they come from. But simple momentum does not explain the specific quality of the attention that Stewie still receives. When new Stewie episodes air, people watch and respond. When clips surface on social media, they are shared. When the spin-off was announced in March 2026, the reaction was enthusiastic rather than dismissive. People wanted to see what would happen with this character in a new context, which means they care about the character. Caring is not something that persists purely out of inertia. Caring requires something to care about. What Stewie still offers, in 2026, is a perspective on the world that is genuinely useful and genuinely amusing. His specific combination of intellectual arrogance and emotional vulnerability, his refusal to accept the terms the world tries to impose on him, while simultaneously being shaped by his relationships in ways he does not always choose, his maintenance of extraordinary ambition, in the face of extraordinary ordinariness, these qualities have not aged out of relevance. If anything, they have become more resonant as the decades have passed, because the world that Stewie inhabits, comfortable, suburban, obtuse, saturated with the ordinary, is a world that more people feel trapped in rather than liberated by. His response to that world, which is to simply refuse to accept its self-definition, remains an appealing fantasy. He is also, in his later form, a figure who embodies something that people are increasingly willing to talk about: the coexistence of strength and vulnerability, the possibility of being both fiercely capable and genuinely afraid, the way that loving someone does not diminish you but instead reveals something about you that nothing else can access. These themes were not part of the original Stewie. They emerged from the evolution of the character. And their presence in the current version of Stewie is part of what makes him feel contemporary rather than dated, part of what allows him to still speak to audiences who are not simply nostalgic for what the show was in 1999, but who are interested in what it is now and what it might still become. The spin-off is, in this sense, more than a commercial opportunity. It is a creative proposition, an argument that Stewie Griffin, at this specific moment in his history, has more to say. That the particular combination of qualities he now carries, after 27 years of development, is not a diminishment of the original, but an accumulation, something richer and more layered than what was there at the start, and capable of doing things with storytelling that the original character was not designed to attempt. We will know, when the spin-off arrives in 2027, whether that proposition is correct. We will watch, many of us, with the particular combination of hope and skepticism that 27 years of investment in a character produces, wanting it to be good, having some evidence that it can be good, And knowing from experience that good intentions and capable people are not the same thing as excellent television. But the wanting is there. After all this time, after all these episodes, after all these versions of one extraordinary character, the wanting is still genuinely there. And that, more than any rating or any renewal deal or any streaming number, is the truest measure of what Stewie Griffin means. He is worth watching for. He has always been worth watching for. And if the spin-off gives him the space and the freedom and the creative attention to be the full version of himself, the evil genius and the loving friend, the supremely confident planner, and the being who needs Rupert to sleep, then it will have been worth everything. The 27 years, the evolution, the losses, and the gains, all of it. Sleep well. The world is still out there, full of ordinary things and extraordinary possibilities, full of plans that might work and plans that won't, full of people who cannot hear you and one or two who can. The baby in the red overalls is still planning something, somewhere in a modest Rhode Island house, while the family moves through its comfortable chaos around him. And he is not done yet. Section 26. The sounds of Stewie music, performance, and the oral identity of the character. There is something specific that happens in the body when Stewie Griffin speaks. Not a visual recognition, though his physical design is instantly identifiable, but an oral one. The voice arrives and something in the listener's nervous system recognizes it with the particular pleasure of encountering something both familiar and pleasurable. This is the response to a great character voice. Not just recognition, but comfort. The comfort of being in the presence of something that has its own internal logic, its own weight, its own rules that it will not break. McFarlane has spoken about the specific technical elements of Stewie's voice in interviews over the years, the placement, the breath support, the resonance required to sustain the accent across a full recording session. Voice acting for animation is not simply a matter of being good at voices. It is a sustained physical performance that makes specific demands on the body across hours of recording and maintaining the quality and consistency of a character as specific as Stewie requires both technical skill and physical stamina that are easy to underestimate if you have not experienced the demands of the work directly. The musical numbers that the Road to episodes have made a tradition deserve particular attention in this context because they represent the most demanding extension of the character voice work into a different mode of expression. Singing requires a different use of the voice than speech, different breath control, different vowel placement, different relationship between the body and the sound. To sing in character, to maintain the specific qualities of a character voice while also meeting the technical demands of the musical performance, is a considerable challenge. To do it as consistently and as effectively as McFarlane has done it across more than a dozen musical sequences in the Road to tradition is genuinely impressive. The song You and I Are So Awfully Different from Road to Rhode Island remains one of the great character duets in animated television. It is a song that contains genuine wit in its lyrics, genuine warmth in its performance, and a specific quality of wistfulness that is unusual in a show that is, most of the time, not particularly interested in wistfulness. Stewie and Brian's voices in this song communicate something about their relationship that the spoken dialogue of the episode has been building toward, but has not quite arrived at the acknowledgement of genuine affection between two beings who would not, on the surface, seem to have any particular reason to care about each other. The specific sonic texture of the Stewie voice, the consonants, the vowels, the rhythm of his sentences, the way certain words are slightly elongated for emphasis while others are clipped almost to nothing, has become one of the most recognizable sounds in American popular culture. You can play 3 seconds of Stewie speaking and the character is identified instantly by anyone who has even a passing familiarity with Family Guy. This level of sonic distinctiveness is not common. It requires both a great original design and a sustained, disciplined performance across a very long period of time. The evolution of the voice across 27 years is worth noting, though it is subtle enough that most viewers would not be consciously aware of it. The early Stewie voice has a slightly sharper, slightly more theatrical quality than the current one. The accent is more pronounced, the emphases more deliberate, the overall effect slightly more stylized. As the seasons progressed and as Stewie's character became more emotionally complex, the voice has softened very slightly in ways that mirror the character's emotional evolution. It is still unmistakably Stewie. But it is Stewie at a different age, speaking from a different place, carrying a different weight of experience. The voice has grown, imperceptibly but genuinely, alongside the character. The ASMR quality of Stewie's voice, the reason it works so particularly well in the context of this kind of video, designed for relaxed listening and comfortable drifting, comes partly from these very qualities. The precision of the consonants, the controlled flow of the sentences, the unhurried confidence of the delivery, the absence of shouting or sudden tonal shifts. These are the characteristics of a voice that is easy to settle into, easy to let carry you. Stewie never rushes. He never needs to. He knows exactly what he is going to say, and he says it at the pace that serves the saying. There is something deeply restful about a voice that operates with that kind of certainty, which is appropriate, perhaps. The evil genius baby who wanted to take over the world has ended up, among other things, being the perfect companion for the small hours of the night, the voice that fills the quiet with something interesting, something warm, something that asks nothing of you but the willingness to listen. That is a kind of victory, too. Rest now. You have earned it. End of script. Stewie Griffin's entire story explained. To fall asleep to written. For Uncle Guy lore. Warhammer 40k and animation lore. ASMR. Style script length. 30,000 plus words. Estimated video length. 3.54 hours at standard narration pace. All facts verified through multiple sources as of August 2026. Addendum. The supporting mythology, everything else that makes Stewie's world complete. There are details in the Stewie Griffin mythology that do not fit neatly into any chronological section, but that are part of the accumulated texture of who he is and how the show has built his world across decades of storytelling. These are the small facts, the recurring elements, the character notes that exist in the background of his story rather than at its dramatic center, but that give the character his specific density and completeness. The question of whether other characters can understand Stewie has been handled with deliberate inconsistency throughout the show's run, and this inconsistency is itself a creative choice rather than an oversight. In the early seasons, the rule was clear and sustained. Almost no one can understand Stewie except Brian. The adults hear babbling. The family moves around him without registering his speech as coherent. But as the series developed, this rule was occasionally and deliberately broken. Peter would sometimes respond to something Stewie said in ways that suggested he heard it, only for the show to retreat back into the standard convention in the next episode. The inconsistency is playful rather than sloppy. It serves the comedy by keeping the audience slightly uncertain about the boundaries of the world's rules, which means that any given scene could resolve in multiple directions. The character of Bertram, Stewie's half-brother, introduced in Mission Impossible as a rival sperm cell, and later developed in a handful of episodes as an actual antagonist, represents one of the show's more intriguing missed opportunities in Stewie's mythology. The idea of Stewie having a peer, someone of comparable intelligence and comparable ambition who operates as a genuine rival, was never fully developed, but gestures toward a version of Stewie's story that might have been enormously interesting. A world in which Stewie was not unique, in which his specific kind of extraordinary had a counterpart, would be a genuinely different kind of story. The episodes that do feature Bertram demonstrate this. The rivalry between the two is playful and sharp in a way that differs from Stewie's usual interactions, because Bertram is someone who actually understands what Stewie is and can engage with him on his own terms. The relationship between Stewie and his extended family, particularly his maternal grandparents, Carter and Barbara Pewterschmidt, is another underexplored thread in the mythology. Carter Pewterschmidt, Lois's wealthy and curmudgeonly father, is one of the characters who seems most aware, in a vague way, that Stewie is unusual. His occasional interactions with his youngest grandson have a quality that the Stewie-Peter dynamic does not. Carter is capable of a kind of respect for ambition and ruthlessness that Peter entirely lacks, and in those moments where the two of them share screen time, there is a hint of recognition. Carter sees something in Stewie that no one else quite sees. Whether this is because Carter is himself a figure of significant power and ruthlessness, or simply because the show occasionally needed Carter to serve that narrative function, the effect is real regardless of its source. The ongoing question of what Stewie will become when he grows up has been addressed directly in a handful of episodes, most significantly in Stewie Griffin. The Untold Story. The 2005 direct-to-video film in which Stewie travels 30 years into his own future and encounters his adult self. What he finds there is not the global dictator he has been working toward, but a man called Stu Ordinary, slightly defeated, working in retail, lacking the fire and the ambition and the extraordinary capability of his younger self. The encounter devastates him, naturally. But it also raises the question the show has never fully answered. Is Stewie's extraordinary nature something he will maintain, or is it something that the grinding ordinariness of adult life will eventually wear away? The spin-off Stewie, set for 2027, is, in some sense, the show's current answer to this question. By positioning Stewie in a new school environment, with new challenges and new companions and a fresh context for deploying his capabilities, the show is arguing implicitly that the fire has not gone out, that the plans are still there, that whatever happened to Stu in that bleak future timeline, the Stewie of the present is not going quietly into that diminishment. He is still building things. He is still going places. He is still, fundamentally, himself. That is, in the end, the most hopeful thing that can be said about any character who has been through as much change as Stewie Griffin has experienced across 27 years of television. He is still himself. The armor may have different layers now. The plans may have different targets. The specific project of conquest may have given way to something that looks more like exploration. But the essential Stewie, the one who will not accept the world's terms, who will find the way forward when the available paths seem exhausted, who will bring to bear on whatever problem he encounters a quality of mind that the world around him cannot quite compass, that Stewie is still there. It is late now, very late. The kind of late where the world has gone quiet and the night has settled fully around whatever space you are occupying, and the words on this recording have become a gentle current carrying you somewhere close to sleep. Stewie Griffin has been with you for this whole journey, 27 years of his story, from the first episode to the spin-off announcement, from the laser guns to the time machine to the bank vault to the therapy room. You know him now in a way that goes beyond what any single viewing experience can produce. You know the shape of his life, the arc of his evolution, the accumulation of moments that constitute who he has been and what he might still become. That knowledge is not a small thing. Characters who earn this kind of sustained attention, who reward the investment of decades with stories that actually matter these characters, are not common. Stewie Griffin is one of them. Rest easy. The world domination plans can wait until morning.